the enamel bracelet broke, before Lady Seraphina Walcote reached the chapel, and in that small, treacherous sound she heard the first crack in a future arranged before she had learned to speak. For one suspended breath, she thought the noise must have come from the chandelier crystals above the long gallery, from some careless footman disturbing the air, from anything except the clasp at her wrist. Then the bracelet shifted, the loosened edge pressed beneath her glove, cold and sharp, and the painted Walcote lilies and Harrowdene hawks no longer sat cleanly against her skin. It had been sent to her cradle by Harrowdene, an enamel promise laid upon an infant who could neither accept nor refuse it. Since childhood, she had been told that the bracelet was an honor. It meant she would become Duchess of Harrowdene. It meant she must learn to enter rooms without haste, answer insult without heat, play the pianoforte without vanity, speak French without sounding proud, and smile as if obedience were a temperament rather than a discipline. That morning in May of 1817, she stood in bridal white beneath the painted ancestors of Walcote House in Hertfordshire, eldest daughter of Emery Walcote, Earl of Walcote. Trained for a marriage everyone else had signed upon her life. Beyond the long gallery waited the family chapel, trimmed with white ribbons and spring flowers. Beyond the chapel waited Caspar Rowntree, Duke of Harrowdene, the man who had been promised to her since birth. At least, everyone had said he waited. 10 minutes earlier, Daphne had come into the dressing room in pale blue silk, her eyes bright with tears, and her beauty arranged into trembling devotion. "Dear Sarah," she had whispered, taking Seraphina's wrist between both hands. "You look exactly as you were meant to look." Her fingers had closed over the bracelet clasp. Too tightly. Seraphina had felt the pinch, but had not pulled away. Daphne was 19, delicate where society rewarded delicacy, and Seraphina had been trained never to make a younger sister's emotion seem inconvenient. Then Lady Nerissa Walcote, Countess of Walcote, had entered with soft grey gloves and a softer warning that serenity was a bride's finest ornament. Lord Walcote had followed only long enough to remind Seraphina that no display of feeling must disturb the alliance. So Seraphina had stood still. She had stood still for nurses, governesses, dancing masters, dressmakers, patronesses, and family ambition. She had stood still so long that silence had almost mistaken itself for virtue. Now the gallery doors opened, and the expected hush moved through the company. Family, clergy, county neighbours, Harrowdene relations, and invited patronesses turned toward her in a single wave of anticipation. Seraphina lifted her chin. Then she saw Caspar. He was not at the chapel arch. He stood halfway down the long gallery, handsome, fair, and composed in a dark coat cut with cruel perfection. Beside him stood Daphne, not behind him with the bridesmaids, not near Lady Nerissa. Beside him, her blue sleeve brushed his arm. Seraphina felt the wrongness before she understood it. A groom did not leave his place before the vows. A duke did not stand in his bride's path unless he meant to stop more than a procession. Caspar looked at her, and there was no shame in his eyes, only the discomfort of a man about to perform injury while expecting gratitude for his restraint. "Lady Seraphina," he said, formal, public, final. "I cannot proceed." Someone gasped near the windows. The music faltered into silence. Seraphina felt the cracked clasp slide lower against her wrist. "Cannot." Her voice was quiet, but the gallery carried it. She had been trained for rooms like this, though never for this wound. Caspar drew a folded paper from inside his coat and held it high enough for everyone to see, not high enough for anyone to read. Information has reached me which makes this marriage impossible. A physician's certificate has confirmed concerns that should have been disclosed before any final settlement was made. The phrase moved through the room in whispers. A physician's certificate. Concerns. Settlement. Seraphina understood with awful clarity that he was not merely refusing her. He was making her body the reason. He was turning her health, her womanhood, her capacity to become a duchess and mother of Harrowdene, heirs into a paper he could wave before witnesses while denying her its words. "I have not been examined by a physician in relation to this marriage," she said. Caspar's jaw tightened. No gentleman would wish to state the matter plainly before witnesses. Then perhaps no gentleman should use it before witnesses. The room drew in breath. Daphne's lashes lowered. Lady Nerissa's expression sharpened beneath its layer of concern. Lord Walcote moved one step forward. "Seraphina." Her father's voice was a command to become manageable. She did not look at him. Caspar glanced toward Daphne. It was brief. It was enough. "Lady Daphne Walcote has shown courage, tenderness, and honesty where others have allowed concealment. With Lord Walcote's consent, I will seek to transfer the alliance to her." Transfer. The word struck harder than rejection. A woman could be mourned. A disappointment could be repaired. A transfer belonged to ledgers, parcels, livestock, estates. Seraphina looked at her father. He did not meet her eyes. Lady Nerissa came towards Seraphina with graceful urgency, already shaping the scene into something containable. "My dear, you must step into the morning room. You are overwrought." Her hand closed around Seraphina's wrist. Pain flashed where the broken bracelet pressed into skin. Before Seraphina could pull free, another hand intervened. A gentleman stepped from beside the third ancestral portrait, where shadow and dark tailoring had made him almost part of the oak panelling. Griffin Staveley, Duke of Larkmere. Seraphina knew his name, as everyone in England of their circle knew it. A duke with old power, a dry wit, and the dangerous habit of noticing what comfortable people preferred to leave unexamined. He was not golden like Caspar. He was darker, leaner, older by several years, with a controlled mouth and eyes that seemed to take account of every movement in the room. His presence altered the gallery at once. "Lady Nerissa," he said, pleasantly enough that the rebuke cut deeper. "No lady will be handled in my presence." Lady Nerissa released Seraphina as though burned. Caspar's face hardened. "Larkmere, this is a private family matter." Griffin looked around the crowded gallery. "Then it is unfortunate that you chose to perform it before half the county." Silence followed. Not approval, something more useful. Uncertainty. Seraphina swayed then, only a little, but the white edges of the gallery blurred. Griffin's hand came to her elbow, steady and immediate. His touch was light through her sleeve. Support offered for balance, not possession displayed before witnesses. The instant she was steady, he released her. That restraint nearly undid her more than sympathy would have done. For one breath, someone had helped without taking command of her. Daphne's voice trembled. "Sarah, please don't make this worse. Caspar only tried to spare you." Seraphina turned to her sister. Daphne's eyes shone beautifully, but no tear had yet crossed her cheek. The pale blue silk at her wrist was slightly creased, as if something had been twisted beneath her fingers. Seraphina looked down at the bracelet. The clasp was cracked, and a tiny fragment of enamel had disappeared. The lilies and hawks no longer met cleanly. Slowly, she unfastened what remained. The damaged metal resisted, then yielded. Every person in the room seemed to watch the little circle come free from her wrist. How strange, she thought, that an object sent to mark her security should require effort to remove even after the man attached to it had abandoned her. She closed the bracelet in her palm. Was I promised as a woman, she asked Caspar, or inventoried as a condition? His mouth opened. No answer came. Lord Walcote muttered her name again. Lady Nerissa whispered, "Enough." Seraphina lifted her closed hand. Enough was when a hidden paper was used to call me unfit, and I was expected to be grateful it was not read aloud. A stir moved through the gallery. Some guests looked at Caspar, others looked away, which was its own confession. Griffin turned slightly toward Seraphina. "Lady Seraphina, do you wish to leave this room?" The question was simple. It hurt because it was a question. All her life, doors had opened because other people had decided where she ought to go. Today, one man had asked. She looked once toward the chapel arch, once at Daphne, once at the paper still in Caspar's hand. "I will leave this gallery," she said. "I will not bless their alliance. I will not surrender this bracelet until I have read the accusation made against me." Griffin inclined his head. "Then that is what will be remembered." The company parted slowly as Seraphina walked toward the door. Not from respect yet. Respect required courage, and the room had shown very little of that. They parted because scandal had shifted shape, and no one knew whom it would wound next. As she passed Daphne, Seraphina saw the faint pressure mark around her sister's wrist beneath the lace cuff. She said nothing. Silence had served obedience once. Now it would serve evidence until truth was ready to speak. Behind her, Griffin remained in the long gallery, while whispers rose again, and Lady Nerissa moved too late to recover control. He glanced down at his gloved palm. There lay the tiny enamel flake he had taken from the floor when no one else was watching. Caught along its broken edge was a single thread of pale blue silk. By the time Seraphina reached the morning room, Walcote House had already begun rearranging disgrace into household order. Footmen carried away unused prayer books with their eyes lowered. A maid gathered white ribbons from the corridor, as if the wedding had merely misplaced its hour. Somewhere beyond the closed doors, Daphne sobbed in intervals, delicate enough to summon sympathy without exhausting the listener. No one wept for the bride who had been replaced. Seraphina stood beside the cold fireplace and kept the cracked enamel bracelet closed inside her gloved fist until the broken clasp pressed a half-moon ache into her palm. She would not sit because sitting would invite a cordial. A cordial would invite murmurs about shock. By evening, shock would become nerves. Nerves would become delicacy, and delicacy would become proof. She had seen drawing rooms do more with less. Lady Nerissa Walcote entered first, every fold of her grey silk arranged into sorrow. As Countess of Walcote, she had mastered the art of making command look like concern. Lord Walcote followed with his cane in hand, though he used it most when he wished impatience to appear paternal. Behind them came Lady Marable Ashford, Seraphina's maternal aunt, widowed, quiet and pale with anger she had not yet permitted herself to spend. "My dear child," Lady Marable said. She did not reach at once. She opened her hands only slightly, offering comfort rather than claiming it. The restraint nearly broke Seraphina. Kindness was dangerous while she was still holding herself together. Lady Nerissa closed the door. This must be contained. Seraphina looked at her. The wedding or the truth? Lord Walcote's cane touched the carpet once, not loudly, but with the practiced sound of a man who expected rooms to obey him. "You will not take that tone with your mother." "Lady Nerissa is my stepmother." The correction was quiet, That made it sharper. Lady Nerissa's eyes cooled, though her mouth remained wounded. We shall forgive much today. You have suffered a disappointment. Seraphina opened her hand. The bracelet lay across her palm, its lilies and hawks broken apart by the cracked clasp. A disappointment is a missed dance, Lady Nerissa. This was a public accusation. Lord Walcote looked away from the bracelet too quickly. Harsh words will not mend what has occurred. Harrowdene has acted, and we must consider the position of this family. My position was considered before I was born. It appears to have been the only thing anyone considered. The alliance with Harrowdene must be preserved, he said. If not through you, then through Daphne. There are settlements, obligations, expectations. Our house cannot afford spectacle. There it was. Not sorrow, not outrage on her behalf. Afford. The word settled between them heavier than grief. Seraphina closed her fingers around the bracelet again. Then you knew before he spoke. Lord Walcote's face hardened. I knew there were concerns. About me? About your suitability? Lady Maribel stepped forward. What concerns? Lady Nerissa turned to her with a softness that held no warmth. My dear Maribel, this is painful enough without enlarging it. It has already been enlarged, Lady Maribel said. It was enlarged in the long gallery before clergy and county witnesses. Seraphina looked at her father. I want to read the certificate. Silence struck the room cleanly. Lady Nerissa moved toward the tea table and began straightening cups no one had disturbed. That is impossible, because it does not exist, because it concerns matters no unmarried lady should be forced to hear discussed. Seraphina almost laughed, but the sound would have cost too much. Caspar held it before half the county, and made my body the reason he chose my sister. My modesty was not protected then. Lord Walcote's jaw tightened. The paper was not read aloud. How merciful. A blade is kinder if one keeps it folded. Lady Nerissa set a cup down with great care. The certificate speaks only of a hereditary delicacy of nerves. Nothing shameful, only prudence. Harrowdene requires a duchess able to bear great pressure, ceremony, expectation, and eventually heirs. No one wishes to wound you by saying more. Her tone was gentle enough to make cruelty look like shelter. Seraphina felt the room narrowing around her. A hereditary delicacy, a phrase soft enough to pass through fans and teacups, sharp enough to cut every future proposal. Every room, every child she might, one day be said unfit to bear. Who examined me? She asked. Lady Nerissa's eyes flickered. The physician's name is attached. That is not an answer. Lord Walcote intervened. Dr. Selwyn March is a respected man. Lady Maribel's head lifted. Doctor, March has not attended Seraphina since she was a girl. Seraphina turned slowly. How many years? 8 at least, Lady Maribel said. Perhaps more. A small error appeared in Lady Nerissa's composure. Not a crack, but a seam under pressure. Fashionable physicians are often consulted by correspondence. About a woman they have not seen in 8 years? Seraphina asked. On the morning of her wedding, Lady Nerissa's voice chilled. You are proving precisely why a period of rest would be wise. My cousin in Shropshire has a quiet house. You could recover there without gossip. Recover from what? From agitation, or from asking questions? Lord Walcote's colour rose. You will not turn this into a campaign. Your sister's future now depends upon dignity. Mine depended upon silence. Look where that led. A knock came before he could answer. The butler entered with a silver salver, stiff with dread at bringing another object into a room already wounded by paper. Forgive me, my lord. A note has arrived from His Grace, the Duke of Larkmere. Lady Nerissa's hand stopped above the teapot. Lord Walcote took the note. The dark green seal looked unhurried, almost insolent in its calm. He broke it, read, and flushed from collar to cheek. "Well?" Seraphina asked. "His Grace requests permission to call tomorrow morning." "On whom?" "On this household." "That was not my question." Lady Maribel extended her hand. "May I read it?" For one moment, Lord Walcote looked ready to refuse. Then rank remembered rank. A duke's note could not be crushed because an earl found it inconvenient. He passed it over. Lady Maribel read aloud. "His Grace presents his compliments to Lord Walcote and requests the honour of calling tomorrow at 11, in the presence of a proper chaperone, to inquire after Lady Seraphina Walcote's welfare, and to clarify the circumstances of the abrupt alteration announced before witnesses this morning." Her voice strengthened. "He further states that any rumour affecting a lady's marriage prospects ought not to circulate unless it can bear daylight." Seraphina looked down before anyone could see what the words did to her. Daylight. Not pity, not rescue, daylight. Lady Nerissa recovered first. "Larkmere has no right to intrude. He witnessed the accusation," Lady Maribel said. "So did half the county. And if he continues to stir the matter, the county will hear more than it should." Seraphina lifted her head, "Then let it hear what is true." Lady Nerissa's expression softened into warning. "Truth is not always useful to women, nor is obedience, apparently." Lord Walcote folded the note sharply. "Enough. You will not receive Larkmere alone. I would not receive any gentleman alone. You will not encourage him. If asking to read a paper about myself encourages him, then perhaps he is easily encouraged by justice." Lady Maribel's mouth twitched, then steadied. The exchange cost Seraphina more than she allowed her face to show. Beneath the anger lay something colder. Her father had not asked whether she had been hurt. Lady Nerissa had not asked whether the certificate was true. They had asked only how quietly she could be removed from the story. After they left, saying they must attend to Daphne's distress, Lady Maribel remained. She came near enough to be comfort, and far enough to remain respectful. "You may sit now if you choose." Seraphina looked at the sofa. The phrase mattered, "if you choose." She sat because the choice was hers, and only then did her hand begin to shake. The bracelet clicked faintly against her glove. Lady Maribel noticed but did not comment. "We will not let them send you away without the paper being read," she said. "They may try. Then they will find I am more troublesome than I look." A sound at the side door interrupted them. Bess, one of the upper housemaids, slipped in with a coal scuttle she had not been summoned to bring. Her face was pale beneath her cap. "Forgive me, my lady, I shouldn't speak." Seraphina sat straighter. "No one will force you." That made the girl's eyes fill faster than pressure might have done. "Miss Daphne had the bracelet before the procession." "Not off your wrist, my lady." "I mean she had it twisted in her hand while she was with you." "I saw through the dressing-room door when Lady Nerissa called me for pins. Miss Daphne was looking at the clasp like she meant to find how it opened." Seraphina's fingers closed around the damaged enamel. "Did anyone know you saw?" "Lady Nerissa told me afterward I was mistaken about everything I'd seen today, though I hadn't said a word." Lady Maribel rose very slowly. "Thank you, Bess. You have done a brave thing. Say nothing more unless Lady Seraphina asks it of you." Bess curtsied and vanished, frightened by her own courage. Seraphina remained still, the bracelet in her palm and Larkmere's note open on the table. The certificate had not been read. Dr. March had not seen her in 8 years. Daphne had handled the clasp before the gallery. Lady Nerissa had warned a maid before the maid had spoken. Tomorrow, Griffin Staveley would call at 11. Seraphina looked toward the closed door through which her family had gone to comfort the sister who had taken her place. "Aunt," she said, her voice quiet now, but no longer numb. "Before anyone sends me away for rest, I will see the paper that tried to bury me." At 11 o'clock the next morning, Seraphina placed the cracked bracelet on the rosewood table and kept her chair close enough to reclaim it before anyone else could decide what it meant. The blue drawing room had been arranged to look calm. Fresh flowers stood near the window. Tea waited in porcelain cups. Sunlight lay in a polite square upon the carpet, as if Walcote House had not, only yesterday, turned a wedding into a public rejection. Lady Marable Ashford sat by the window with her embroidery unopened in her lap, serving as chaperone, with the stillness of a woman who missed nothing. Lord Walcote stood near the mantel, his displeasure sharpened by the fact that he could not refuse a duke's visit without giving the refusal meaning. Lady Nerissa, Countess of Walcote, presided near the tea service in dove-grey silk, her expression so gentle that it seemed made for witnesses rather than comfort. Seraphina had slept badly. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Caspar's folded certificate and Daphne's pale blue sleeve. Yet when the butler announced Griffin Staveley, Duke of Larkmere, she did not lower her gaze. Griffin entered with the same controlled ease he had shown in the long gallery. But today his attention moved first to her face, not to the damaged ornament on the table. That mattered. It should not have mattered so much, but it did. He bowed to Lady Marable, then to Lady Nerissa, then to Seraphina, and only afterward gave Lord Walcote the courtesy due his rank. "Lady Seraphina," he said, "I hope this morning has brought you some measure of rest." Lady Nerissa answered before Seraphina could. "Rest is precisely what we have recommended. Unfortunately, my stepdaughter has mistaken distress for investigation." Griffin turned toward her with mild interest, a common confusion in houses where distress is expected to be silent. Lord Walcote's mouth tightened. "Your Grace, you asked to call. You are received, but this remains a family matter." The long gallery yesterday contained family, clergy, Harrowdene relations, and enough county witnesses to season a dozen dinner tables. I fear privacy was dismissed before I arrived. A faint sound came from Lady Marable, not quite a cough. Seraphina kept her hands folded. She would not smile. Not yet. Lord Walcote's gaze dropped to the table. "If you have come to examine trinkets, you will find disappointment. A broken bracelet proves nothing." "No," Griffin said, "but it may ask a useful question." His eyes met Seraphina's then, and his voice changed, not in warmth exactly, but in care. "May I?" He did not reach for the bracelet. He did not even shift his hand toward it. The question rested in the air, waiting for her to decide whether evidence would leave her possession. After a life spent being handed from one family expectation to another, the pause felt almost extravagant. Seraphina touched the bracelet with 2 fingers and slid it nearer to him, though not beyond her reach. "You may inspect the clasp and the enamel around it." Griffin removed one glove with quiet precision. Only the clasp and enamel. The repetition was not mockery. It was a promise. His bare fingertips touched the damaged edge with a delicacy that made Lady Nerissa's stillness sharpen. He did not lift the bracelet until Seraphina tilted it toward the light. His fingers brushed the outside of her glove only once, a passing contact born of the inspection, and even that felt different from every possessive hand that had tried to steer her since yesterday. This touch had been permitted, It took nothing. The fracture is fresh, Griffin said. The enamel at the break is too bright. No dust settled into it before yesterday. Lady Nerissa gave a soft laugh. Your Grace has unexpected talents in ladies' jewellery. Only eyesight, Lady Nerissa, a talent too often discouraged. He angled the bracelet toward the window. There was a decorative enamel panel beneath this clasp. Seraphina leaned closer before she could stop herself. A panel, small, hidden when worn, but painted, I think, with the same family device. Such pieces are often made to complete the ornament from beneath, especially when the commission is ceremonial. He paused, then pointed without touching further. It has been pried loose. The clasp frame is cracked here. The maker's mark should remain somewhere on the broken frame or the hinge. Mr. Vale of London, unless I mistake the hand. Lord Walcote's eyes narrowed. You know the maker. I know his work. My mother owned an enamel mourning clasp from the same shop, Mr. Vale has a habit of making sentiment look stronger than metal. The sentence settled upon the room with uncomfortable aptness. Seraphina looked at the torn setting and felt the shape of yesterday's altar. The bracelet had not merely broken. Something had been taken from it. Something small enough to hide. Something meaningful enough to steal. She remembered Daphne's fingers pressing hard in the dressing room, the tremor that had not felt like grief, the brief flash of concentration under all that watery sweetness. Daphne held it there, Seraphina said, touching the air above the damaged clasp. Her thumb was on this place. Lady Nerissa set down her teaspoon. Your sister embraced you before a painful day. Do you mean to punish affection because a bauble cracked under strain? Affection does not usually pry panels loose. Griffin's reply was mild, but the room heard the blade beneath it. Lord Walcote stepped away from the mantel. This is intolerable. Lady Daphne is not to be slandered because Seraphina has suffered disappointment. Seraphina looked at him then, not as a daughter seeking permission, as a woman beginning to understand the price of permission. Yesterday, Caspar slandered me with a certificate he refused to read. Today I ask how my bracelet came to be damaged before he spoke. You will not put your sister on trial? No. She has not yet been accused before half the county. I know how that is done. Lady Marable's needlework remained unopened, but her eyes shone. Griffin set the bracelet back exactly where Seraphina had placed it, neither closer to himself nor farther from her. There is a practical course, Mr. Vale can confirm whether the panel was part of the original commission and whether any recent work has been done to a matching piece. Lady Nerissa's smile returned. A craftsman dragged into family sorrow. How refined. Truth is often less refined than falsehood, Griffin said, but it is more durable. Before Seraphina could answer, the butler entered with a salver. Lord Walcote seized the folded note upon it and broke the seal. Harrowdene wax. Seraphina knew it before he read a word. Her body remembered Caspar's hand lifting paper in the gallery, but she forced herself to remain still. The Duke of Harrowdene requests. Lord Walcote said, his voice tight with satisfaction, the return of all Harrowdene tokens in Lady Seraphina's possession. He further expects a written expression of goodwill toward his corrected engagement to Lady Daphne to prevent uncharitable misunderstanding. Lady Nerissa lowered her lashes. A reasonable request, generous, even, considering yesterday's strain. Seraphina looked at the bracelet. All her childhood lay in that cracked enamel. Every lesson, every warning, every corrected smile. They had made her into a promise, rejected the promise, and now wanted the evidence returned before it could speak. She picked it up and closed it in her palm. No, Lord Walcote stared at her. "You will reconsider that answer?" "No," she repeated. The second time was easier. "His Grace of Harrowdene may have his tokens when I have read the certificate used to discard me. He may have goodwill when truth has survived the day. Until then, I will not bless my own erasure." Griffin did not smile. The moment was too serious for triumph, but something in his stillness warmed, as if respect had found a place to stand. Lady Nerissa rose. "This interview is over." "For today," Griffin said, putting his glove back on, "with Lady Seraphina's permission, I will send discreet inquiry to Mr. Vale." Seraphina felt every eye in the room press upon her. Permission. The word had become strange and powerful, a key turned in a lock she had not known was hers. "You have my permission," she said. A faint movement sounded beyond the half-closed door. Seraphina turned. A strip of pale blue vanished from the gap, quick as a lie escaping down a corridor. Daphne had been listening. Lady Nerissa's face did not change, but her fingers tightened at her side. Griffin saw the blue silk too. He bowed to Seraphina. "Then I shall ask the question a broken thing is still honest enough to answer." When he left, the room seemed less orderly than before. Though not one chair had moved, Seraphina stood with the bracelet in her hand, feeling the damaged clasp press against her glove. Yesterday it had been a symbol of abandonment. Today it had become something else. Not rescue, not yet justice. A beginning. The invitation to Harrowdene House arrived on paper so thick and creamy that insult seemed to have been taught good breeding. Seraphina received it in the blue drawing room on the fourth morning after the broken wedding procession, with the cracked bracelet, locked upstairs in her jewel case under Lady Maribel's seal, and Griffin's inquiry to Mr. Vale already on its way to London. Lord Walcote stood near the window, while Lady Nerissa poured tea no one had asked for, and both of them wore the careful expressions of people who had decided obedience was not only expected, but overdue. "The Duke of Harrowdene requests the honour of our company at dinner this evening," Lord Walcote said. A small family gathering, nothing public. Seraphina looked at the card in his hand. Nothing public enough to be called public. Lady Nerissa's mouth curved with patient sorrow. "My dear, society must see that no bitterness divides the families. If you remain absent, every whisper will harden, and if I attend, then you may show dignity." Seraphina understood the offer. She was to sit at Harrowdene's table and make her own replacement appear civilized. She was to lend her composure to Daphne, her silence to Caspar, and her face to the lie that no injury had been done. Lady Maribel, seated beside her with embroidery untouched in her lap, did not speak. She had learned Seraphina's silences well enough to know when they were no longer surrender. Lord Walcote lowered the card. "You will attend. You will speak graciously. You will show no resentment. Harrowdene has not made the certificate public. That restraint deserves some return." He held it before witnesses. He did not read it. A gentleman does not earn gratitude for sheathing a blade after everyone has seen it. Lady Nerissa set down the teapot with a soft click. "Take care, Seraphina. Sharpness will only confirm what others already fear." There it was again. Not plainly. Never plainly. The hint that a woman who objected to humiliation proved herself unfit to be spared it. Seraphina folded her hands in her lap. "I will attend." Lord Walcote exhaled in relief too soon. Lady Nerissa's eyes sharpened. Lady Maribel looked at Seraphina, and Seraphina gave the smallest nod. This was not obedience, it was observation. Daphne would be there, Caspar would be there. The stolen panel, if it had truly been pried from the bracelet, had to go somewhere. Before Harrowdene House could wear it openly, someone would reveal impatience, fear, or pride. That evening, London received them beneath a grey sky, and lamps just beginning to glow. Harrowdene House stood polished and severe, its windows bright with the kind of hospitality that enjoyed witnesses. The dinner was intimate in number and cruel in design. There were no musicians, no dancing, no vulgar declaration of festivity. Only selected relatives, Lady Walcote, 2 patronesses, a clergyman too nervous to meet Seraphina's eyes, and enough silver to make injury look ancestral. Daphne stood near Caspar in pale blue silk, lace falling low over both wrists despite the warmth of the room. Seraphina saw the lace first. Then she saw the way Daphne's right hand kept drifting toward her left cuff, guarding it whenever conversation came too near. "Sarah," Daphne breathed, crossing the drawing room with a tenderness so rehearsed it almost curtsied before it touched her face. "You came. I was so afraid you would think yourself unwelcome." "Was I meant to think otherwise?" Daphne's lashes trembled. "I know you're hurt. I don't blame you. But Caspar and I only want peace." Peace is a strange word for a dinner to which the injured party is invited as proof that the injury was polite. Daphne's cheeks flushed. Before she could answer, Caspar approached, handsome and cool in dark evening dress. He bowed with the exact degree of respect that allowed him to appear noble without conceding fault. "Lady Seraphina, your presence does honor to Harrowdene, does it?" His jaw tightened. "I had hoped we might begin again with dignity." "We have not finished the first indignity." Daphne made a soft sound. Lady Nerissa appeared behind them, like a curtain drawn over a window. "My dear, this evening is not for disputation. It is for mercy." "Then I hope mercy has been invited." At that moment, Griffin Staveley, Duke of Larkmere, was announced. The room altered itself. Fans slowed. Shoulders corrected. Caspar's expression chilled. Griffin entered without hurry, bowed to the company, then to Seraphina with the same measured courtesy he gave every lady present. He did not approach her at once. He did not claim alliance with her before the room could accuse her of seeking one. He simply looked once at Daphne's covered wrist, once at Caspar's too polished composure, and took his place among the guests as if he had been invited for the comfort of the truth, and no one else. "Larkmere," Caspar said. "I had not expected you. Expectations have had an unsettled week," Griffin replied. "I thought I might keep mine flexible." Lady Walcote, Caspar's aunt, snapped open her fan. "We are only a family circle tonight." Griffin glanced at the patronesses, the clergyman, the Rowntree cousins, Lady Nerissa, Lord Walcote, Lady Maribel, and the servants lining the wall. A remarkably ambitious family. A few mouths tightened against smiles. Seraphina looked down, though not quickly enough to miss the brief gleam in his eyes. Dinner was a lesson in refined pressure. Lady Walcote spoke of the courage required to correct mistakes. Lady Nerissa murmured that Providence sometimes spared families at the last moment. Caspar praised Daphne's tenderness. Daphne lowered her eyes each time and looked as if praise were a burden she accepted for others' sake. Every sentence moved around Seraphina without striking directly. That was the skill of their world. To wound a woman in grammar too delicate to protest. Then Daphne dropped her fork. It was a small thing, but she reached after it too quickly. Her lace cuff caught on the carved arm of her chair and pulled back. Beneath it, Seraphina saw a narrow red mark circling the inside of Daphne's wrist, fresh enough to have color. Near the mark, a faint pale dust glimmered against the blue silk, enamel dust. Daphne snatched the lace down. Across the table, Griffin had seen it. His gaze did not linger. It came to Seraphina's for one quiet instant, and in that instant she felt less alone, not because he had saved her, but because he had witnessed the same truth. The courses passed with unbearable elegance. When the servants withdrew to the edges after the second remove, Caspar rose with a glass in hand. Seraphina felt Lady Maribel grow still beside her. "Before we proceed," Caspar said, "I wish to thank those who have understood the painful necessity of recent events. Lady Daphne has shown a generosity of spirit that does honor to both Walcote and Harrowdene. In time, I hope all misunderstandings will be laid to rest." He turned toward Seraphina. "Lady Seraphina, I would be grateful if you would join me in a toast to my future Duchess." There it was, the true purpose of the dinner, not peace, submission. If she drank, she blessed the theft. If she refused, she became the bitter woman they needed her to be. The room waited. Her throat was dry, painfully so, but she would not reach for wine with trembling fingers. Then a glass of water appeared beside her right hand. Griffin had not risen. He had not announced his care. He had merely accepted a glass from a passing servant and placed it within her reach, quiet as a thought. The gesture was too small for scandal and too exact for accident. Seraphina touched the base of the glass. She did not drink. She stood. "Your Grace," she said to Caspar, "I cannot toast what has not yet survived truth." Lady Rocombe gasped. Daphne's lips parted. Lord Walcote began to rise. But Caspar was faster. Colour had entered his face. "If you insist on casting suspicion, perhaps the certificate should be read after all." A cold thrill went through the table. Lady Nerissa's eyes flashed with something like warning, but not quickly enough. Griffin's voice cut in, smooth and perfectly level. "Before any certificate is read, any lady is shamed, or any toast is demanded, Harrowdene might clarify one point. Is the evidence against Lady Seraphina too delicate to show or too serious to question? It cannot be both, though the attempt has been energetic." Caspar stared at him. "You overstep." "No, I count. Count. The number of times a woman has been asked to pay for an accusation no one has proved." Silence fell. This time, it did not belong entirely to Harrowdene. Seraphina lifted the water glass at last, not toward Daphne, not toward Caspar, but toward the candles reflecting in its untouched surface. "May every vow spoken in this house survive the truth." She set the glass down. She had not blessed them. She had marked them. The dinner ended colder than the silver. In the entrance hall, while cloaks were brought, and servants pretended not to hear, Caspar announced with brittle brightness that a private viewing would be held in 2 days for select patronesses to admire the newly reset Harrowdene Walcote miniature, a symbol of the corrected alliance. Daphne's hand flew to her covered wrist, then stilled. Seraphina did not move, but every part of her attention sharpened. The missing decorative panel had found its stage. Griffin, standing near the door, heard it too. He looked at Seraphina, not long enough to feed gossip, only long enough to ask without words whether she understood. She did. The next piece of the truth would not remain hidden beneath a clasp. It was about to be worn before witnesses. The private viewing took place in a narrow room off Bond Street, where polished glass cases held painted miniatures, mourning rings, and the kind of secrets society preferred to admire only after they had been made small enough to frame. Seraphina entered with Lady Maribel at her side and felt every conversation lower itself by one careful note. No one stared directly. That would have been vulgar. They looked instead at her reflection in the cabinet glass, at the pale grey of her gown, at the absence of the Harrowdene bracelet from her wrist. That absence felt heavier than the ornament itself. The cracked bracelet remained locked at Walcote House, in her jewel case beneath Lady Maribel's seal, but Seraphina carried its shape in her palm as if the broken clasp still pressed there. Across the room, Daphne stood beside a velvet-covered display table, dressed again in blue silk, her curls arranged with calculated softness. At her throat hung a small enamel pendant on a new white ribbon. Seraphina saw the Walcote lilies first, then the Harrowdene hawks. For one breath, all sound left the room. The decorative enamel panel that should have lain hidden beneath her bracelet clasp had been reset as a miniature and placed above Daphne's heart. The stolen piece looked delicate, almost innocent, under the light. That was the cruelty of it. Wrongdoing often looked prettiest once it had been polished, a charming preservation, Lady Rocombe declared, standing near Daphne with her fan half open. Such comfort when Providence corrects a mistaken arrangement without destroying the old connection. Daphne lowered her lashes. I didn't want a display. Truly, I didn't. But Caspar thought the families needed a symbol of peace. Peace, Seraphina said. The word did not rise. It did not need to. Daphne's fingers went to the pendant. Please don't look at it so. It was only reset because the bracelet was damaged. How did you know which part could be reset? A small rustle moved through the room. Lady Nerissa, Countess of Walcote, came forward before Daphne could answer. Her grey gloves were folded around her reticule, every gesture composed. Old family pieces are often altered when circumstances change. One does not abandon sentiment merely because its setting has failed. No, Seraphina said. One removes it, apparently. Caspar approached from the far side of the display, his expression controlled, but his colour higher than usual. Lady Seraphina, this gathering was intended to heal, not accuse. Then it began poorly by displaying what was taken from my bracelet. Daphne's eyes filled at once. Sarah, how can you say that? You know how terrible that morning was. You were distressed. The clasp broke. I only wanted something good to survive. It did survive, Seraphina replied, until someone pried it loose. Lady Rocombe snapped her fan shut. This is unseemly. So was the long gallery, said Griffin Staveley from the doorway. The room turned. He had entered quietly enough that only the hostess, Lady Veyton, had begun to rise. He bowed with faultless courtesy, first to Lady Veyton, then to Lady Maribel, then to Seraphina. His gaze moved to the pendant at Daphne's throat and rested there for a single measured instant. Not long enough to insult, long enough to see. Larkmere, Caspar said, this is a lady's viewing. Griffin looked about at Caspar, Lord Walcote, the nervous clergyman in the corner, and two gentlemen who had plainly come for gossip under cover of connoisseurship. Then I admire the breadth of its definition. A few fans lifted quickly. Seraphina felt, despite everything, the faintest threat of a smile. It steadied her. Griffin did not come to her side at once. He moved nearer to the display table, giving the pendant the attention one might give a questionable document. Lady Veyton, glittering with curiosity, said, We were admiring the Harrowdene Walcote miniature. Such a pretty survival, Your Grace. Very pretty, Griffin said, and very recently handled. Daphne's hand tightened on the ribbon. It was secured for safety, sensible. Old enamel dislikes rough treatment. His gaze shifted to the lower rim. Still, I wonder why a piece described as an old family miniature has fresh setting gum beneath the gold lip. Lady Veyton leaned closer before manners could stop her. Fresh gum? There, Griffin said. At the lower edge. The adhesive has not darkened. The backing has been scraped. Caspar's voice hardened. You make a hobby of insulting Harrowdene ornaments. Only when Harrowdene ornaments begin as Walcote evidence. Lady Nerissa's expression sharpened. Your Grace has taken a most extraordinary interest in my stepdaughter's disappointment. I dislike waste, Griffin said, especially when truth is wasted on people determined not to use it. The air changed. The room had not chosen Seraphina. Not yet, but it had begun to doubt the ease with which Daphne had been chosen. That was enough for one moment. Seraphina stepped closer to the display. She did not reach for the pendant. She would not be made into a desperate woman snatching at her sister's throat. Who took the panel from the bracelet? Daphne's lips parted. I don't know. I wasn't thinking of such things. Everything was so painful. You were thinking clearly enough to have it reset. Caspar arranged it. Caspar's eyes flashed toward her. It was brief, but not brief enough. I arranged for a damaged token to be made respectable, he said. Lady Daphne wished only to preserve family feeling. Family feeling seems remarkably skilled with tools, Griffin murmured. Lady Rocombe bristled. This persecution of Lady Daphne is intolerable. Lady Seraphina broke the bracelet herself, in jealousy, then regretted it when attention turned away from her. The accusation had been waiting. Seraphina recognized its shape with a chill that reached deeper than anger. First they had called her unsuitable. Now they would call her spiteful. Anything but wronged. Several women shifted, not convinced, but interested. Lady Veyton's eyes brightened. This was how reputations were killed. Not by proof, but by providing the room with a more entertaining possibility. Seraphina looked at Daphne's blue sleeve. If I broke it alone, why was pale blue silk caught in the enamel flake? His Grace found on the long gallery floor. Daphne went still. Not dramatically, completely. Griffin removed a small folded paper from his inner pocket, but did not open it. A thread, he said, lodged in a flake from the broken edge, pale blue, an ordinary color until it becomes persistent. Daphne's hand flew to her cuff, then dropped when she realized the movement had been seen. Lady Nerissa stepped in front of the gesture with the speed of long practice. A thread proves only that sisters embraced before a wedding. Then the craftsman will prove the rest, Seraphina said. The words surprised the room because they were not a plea. They were a direction. If this panel was removed before the bracelet cracked, Mr. Vale will know. If after, he will know that too. Caspar gave a short laugh. You would drag a tradesman into a family sorrow. A tradesman who made the object may understand it better than a duke who found it convenient, Griffin said. Silence followed, sharp and satisfying. Lady Rocombe looked as if she might faint from class offence alone. Lady Nerissa did not. She watched Griffin with the first open dislike Seraphina had seen from her all week. That pleased Seraphina less than it warned her. Lady Veyton moved toward the bell, eager to end the scene only after gathering enough detail to repeat it beautifully. Before she reached it, a footman entered carrying a sealed note for His Grace, the Duke of Larkmere, from Mr. Vale's workshop. The timing sent a visible tremor through Daphne. Griffin took the note, but his eyes went first to Seraphina. Shall I open it here? There it was again, not command, not secrecy, the question. Seraphina felt the weight of every face in the room. If he opened it publicly, they might gain advantage too soon, or lose control of details not yet understood. If he concealed it, Lady Nerissa would call it manipulation. Seraphina looked at the pendant at Daphne's throat, at the fresh gum, at the blue silk, at Caspar's rigid jaw. Read the first lines, she said. No more than the source can safely bear in this room. Griffin's eyes warmed by the smallest degree. He broke the seal. Mr. Vale acknowledges recent work upon a small enamel panel bearing Walcote lilies and Harrowdene hawks. The piece was brought by Lady Daphne Walcote. Daphne made a faint sound. Griffin continued. She did not come alone. Haste was requested and paid for. He folded the note before anyone could demand the rest. Lady Nerissa's face had not changed, but her grey-gloved fingers had closed hard enough around her reticule to crease the leather. Seraphina saw it. So did Griffin. The room erupted softly, which was how polite rooms erupted. Fans, whispers, one chair drawn back, a patroness murmuring, "How very odd." As though oddness were not the first doorway to ruin, Daphne stepped toward Caspar. "I didn't do anything wrong. I only wanted to save what was already broken." Seraphina met her sister's eyes. "Then you should not fear the rest of the note." Lady Maribel came to Seraphina's side. "We should go." Griffin turned to Seraphina, standing at a proper distance. He offered his arm without flourish. For one heartbeat, Seraphina saw every future whisper arranging itself. If she accepted, they would say she had traded one duke's attention for another. If she refused, they would say even Larkmere could not raise her. For once, she did not choose by fear of what they would say. She chose by what was true. She placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve. Griffin did not cover it. He did not draw her close. He walked beside her at the pace she set. And the room had to watch the woman they had expected to shrink, leave upright, under the protection of her own choice. At the door, Griffin lowered his voice so only Seraphina and Lady Maribel could hear. The rest of Mr. Vale's note should be read where Lady Nerissa's gloves cannot answer for her. Seraphina did not look back. Behind them, Daphne's sobs had begun again, but they no longer filled the room in quite the same way. "Then let us find a room with better light," Seraphina said, and for the first time since the long gallery, the whispers behind her sounded less like a verdict than a jury beginning to disagree. The first proof that Seraphina had been made ill on paper waited in the household ledger between a winter sore throat and a delivery of lamp oil. It should have been absurd. A lie that had altered a wedding, shifted a ducal alliance, and placed an invisible stain upon her future should have announced itself with thunder, or at least with handwriting large enough to be ashamed. Instead, it lay upon a narrow inserted page in the small records room off the housekeeper's passage, written in a careful hand that tried very hard to look old. The morning after the Bond Street viewing, Walcote House had settled into a silence too smooth to be natural. Daphne remained upstairs with a headache. Lady Nerissa had declined breakfast, and Lord Walcote had gone early to his study, with the air of a man hoping locked doors could make truth lose interest. Seraphina had waited until the servants moved toward their ordinary duties before she went with Lady Maribel Ashford to the records room. The cracked bracelet was not with her. It remained locked in her jewel case beneath Lady Maribel's seal, because Seraphina had begun to understand that evidence needed guardians as much as women did. In Lady Maribel's reticule lay Mr. Vale's letter, now fully read. Griffin had opened only the first lines at the viewing, but once they had left that glittering little room, he had read the rest aloud in Lady Maribel's carriage, his voice growing colder with every sentence. Daphne had brought the decorative enamel panel to Mr. Vale's workshop. She had not gone alone. The older lady with her had worn grey gloves embroidered at the wrist with the Walcote crest. Haste had been requested. Haste had been paid for. Questions had been discouraged. Lady Nerissa's grey gloves had been folded around her reticule while those words were spoken, and Seraphina had watched them crease leather without trembling. Now in the records room, the air smelled of dust, sealing wax, and old accounts. Ledgers stood in ranks along the shelves, less elegant than portrait frames, and far more honest when left alone. Lady Maribel set a candle on the table, though daylight came through the high window. "We need the household health ledger," she said. Seraphina drew it down herself. It was heavier than expected. She opened it to the year of her childhood and found ordinary life compressed into ink. Lady Seraphina, sore throat. March 1809, Dr. March called once. Lady Daphne, winter fever, January 1812. Broth and rest advised. Lord Walcote, gout, recurring. There were small domestic truths everywhere. A sprained ankle, a cough after rain, a tonic for Lady Nerissa's nerves when the roof accounts displeased her. Nothing that could have undone a wedding. Nothing that could have made a duke stand before witnesses and imply Seraphina was unfit for marriage. Then Lady Maribel touched the page. Here, the inserted sheet sat between older leaves, its edges fractionally cleaner, its fold too crisp. Seraphina leaned over it. The handwriting had been disciplined into resemblance, but it lacked the easy impatience of the old steward's entries. Even the ink betrayed itself, blacker than the brownish strokes before and after. At the bottom, the initials did not match. The old steward had signed A.C. for Abel Croft. This page carried E.C., a small mistake made by someone who knew records mattered but not why. Seraphina read the first line and felt the room grow colder. Lady Seraphina observed, fatigued after dinner, rest recommended. Another, Lady Seraphina agitated after correspondence from Harrowdene, quiet advised. Another, Lady Seraphina unable to bear extended company without visible strain, prudence urged concerning future expectations. The final line carried Dr. Selwyn March's name as if ink could summon a physician from 8 years of absence. Consultation by family correspondents regarding hereditary delicacy of nerves. They turned ordinary hours into symptoms, Seraphina said. Her voice was so even that she hardly recognized it. Dinner into fatigue, letters into agitation, a life into evidence. Lady Maribel's hand hovered near her sleeve. Seraphina. No, let me look. She bent closer. There, in the margin, was a faint blot where the writer had hesitated before choosing the word hereditary. It should not have hurt more than the rest. It did. That word reached backward through her, mother, forward toward children. She might never be allowed to imagine. And sideways into every room where women were measured by what could be whispered about their nerves. They did not need me to be ill, she said. They only needed a page where I appeared to be. A soft sound came from the passage. Lady Maribel closed the ledger halfway, but not before Bess slipped inside with a basket of folded linen clutched against her chest like a shield. The maid's face had lost its color. My lady, I shouldn't be here. Seraphina turned, still holding the page open beneath her fingers. You will not be punished for speaking in this room. Bess looked at Lady Maribel, then back to Seraphina. Her ladyship asked for the records room key the night before the wedding. She said Mrs. Hobb was to go over linen counts in the west wing and not trouble herself. I was in the passage because Miss Daphne had rung twice, and then forgot what she wanted. Lady Nerissa came here with a candle. Miss Daphne came after. I heard the word rest, then certificate. Then Lady Nerissa said, once it is written in the proper place, even a gentleman may pretend he discovered it honestly. Lady Maribel drew in a sharp breath. Seraphina did not move. The ledger lay beneath her hand. No longer a book but a room, with voices still trapped inside it. Did Lady Nerissa know you heard? I thought not, but yesterday she told me I would do well to remember that servants who listen at doors often find themselves without doors to stand behind. Bess's mouth trembled. I have a mother in St. Albans. I send wages home. I don't want to lose my place, my lady, but I couldn't let them say you were born wrong when I saw the page put in. Seraphina's anger changed shape. Until that moment it had burned upward, toward rank, toward Caspar, toward Lady Nerissa's calm hands. Now it bent protectively around the trembling girl before her. If you are dismissed because you told the truth, your dismissal will become part of the truth. Lady Maribel nodded. And if Walcote House no longer deserves you, my house in Kent will find use for a brave girl with a good memory. Bess blinked hard and curtsied so low the linen basket nearly slipped. Thank you, my lady. The door opened before Seraphina could answer. Lady Nerissa stood upon the threshold in grey silk and the same grey gloves Mr. Vale had described. Her gaze moved from Bess to the ledger, then to Seraphina's hand upon the inserted page. Nothing in her face admitted surprise. That was, somehow, more damning. How industrious, she said. Most brides rest after disappointment. You have chosen bookkeeping. Lady Maribel closed the ledger, but left her hand on top of it, a useful occupation when falsehood has taken to writing. Lady Nerissa entered and shut the door behind her. Bess shrank back. Seraphina stepped slightly, enough to place herself between the maid and the countess without making it theatrical. Lady Nerissa noticed. Do not make heroines of servants, Seraphina. It never ends well for them. Dismissed her, Seraphina said, and every household that hears of the ledger will hear of that also. A thin smile touched Lady Nerissa's mouth. You overestimate how much households wish to hear from discarded brides. And you underestimate how loudly a discarded bride may speak once she has nothing left to lose. The two women faced one another across the ledger. For years, Seraphina had thought Lady Nerissa's power lay in softness, in how little force she seemed to use. Now she saw the force clearly. It was the confidence of a woman who had always expected other people to fear consequences more than dishonor. Lady Nerissa looked toward the shelf. That book belongs to Walcote House. So did my name, Seraphina replied. Yet it appears someone altered both. A knock at the outer passage ended the exchange. The butler, looking profoundly unhappy to be near any door that opened onto truth, held out a sealed note. From His Grace, the Duke of Larkmere, for Lady Seraphina. Lady Maribel is named also. Lady Nerissa's eyes flashed, but she could not stop Seraphina from taking it without making the room remember why. Seraphina broke the seal. Griffin's hand was controlled, dark, and unmistakable. Dr. Selwyn March keeps London rooms off Cavendish Square and is presently pressed by debt. He refuses to receive Lady Seraphina Walcote. He has agreed to meet me tomorrow, provided the matter remains discreet. I will not mistake discretion for ownership of what concerns your name. If you permit the meeting, I will report every word. Seraphina read the note twice. The practical part of her knew the value of it. The wounded part heard again a door closing while men discussed what she was fit to be. She looked up. Lady Nerissa watched her carefully. Lady Maribel waited, saying nothing. That was why Seraphina could decide. Send His Grace my reply, she said to the butler. He may meet Dr. March if he chooses, but every word concerning my name is to be brought to me, not arranged around me. The butler bowed and withdrew. Lady Nerissa's voice softened. You think a duke's interest makes you safer? Seraphina placed her palm on the ledger. No, I think truth makes everyone less safe who has depended on my silence. For the first time, Lady Nerissa looked not angry, not offended, but briefly alert to danger. Seraphina saw it and held the sight close. The false page had tried to make her fragile. Instead, it had given her something stronger than composure. It had given her proof that the lie had a hand, a knight, a key, and a witness. By noon the next day, the word unfit had learned to move through silk. It did not stride into Lady Veyton's Grosvenor Square drawing-room. It entered by glances, by unfinished phrases, by the soft retreat of conversation when Seraphina crossed the threshold with Lady Maribel Ashford at her side. No one said it first, which made it worse. A spoken insult could be answered. An implied one settled over a lady's shoulders like perfume she had not chosen and could not easily wash away. Seraphina wore pale grey again. Not because she intended to look wounded, but because colour felt like a declaration others would translate for themselves. Her gloved hands were steady. The cracked bracelet remained locked at Walcote House beneath Lady Maribel's seal. The copied ledger page had not yet been made. Mr. Vale's letter lay folded in Lady Maribel's reticule, and Griffin Staveley had gone that morning to meet Dr. Selwyn March in London rooms Seraphina had never entered. That last fact troubled her more than she had admitted. She had given permission for the meeting, because the physician refused to receive her. But permission did not quiet the old humiliation of men discussing her fitness behind doors. Lady Veyton came forward with a smile sharpened by appetite. "Lady Seraphina, how good of you to join us. We feared you might prefer seclusion." "Seclusion is often recommended by people who prefer not to be questioned," Seraphina said. Lady Veyton's smile flickered, then widened. How spirited. One must admire spirit when health allows it. Lady Maribel's eyes turned cold. Before she could reply, Daphne appeared from beside the pianoforte, dressed in blue muslin with the reset pendant miniature resting at her throat. The little enamel panel caught the light. Walcote lilies, Harrowdene hawks. Seraphina looked at it once and no longer. She would not grant Daphne the pleasure of watching theft become spectacle. "Sarah," Daphne said softly, "I didn't know whether you would come. I'm glad, truly. Then this luncheon has already exceeded expectation." Daphne's face trembled. Lady Rocombe, seated with a fan across her lap, leaned toward the woman beside her and murmured just loudly enough for the room to feel invited. Poor child. One can only imagine the strain upon both sisters. Some constitutions were never meant for great households. Lady Nerissa, Countess of Walcote, did not rebuke the remark. She lowered her eyes, as if pained by compassion. Lord Walcote stood near Caspar Rowntree, Duke of Harrowdene, and looked like a man attempting to hold a cracked vase together by staring at it sternly. Caspar approached Seraphina with a bow polished enough to reflect nothing. "Lady Seraphina, your presence does you credit. Does it do you any?" His mouth tightened. "I have tried to act with restraint throughout this unfortunate matter. You have waived a certificate, hidden its contents, changed brides, and requested a toast. Your restraint is unusually active." A rustle moved through the room. Daphne pressed a hand to the pendant. Caspar's voice lowered. "You mistake necessary discretion for cruelty. No, I distinguish them at last." Lady Veyton clapped her hands softly, summoning movement toward the luncheon table before the exchange could ripen into something no hostess could pretend was charming. The table had been set for intimacy and observation. Seraphina found herself opposite Daphne, with Lady Rocombe to one side and Lady Nerissa angled perfectly to see every expression she made. The first course passed beneath conversation about weather, opera, and a charitable subscription. Then Lady Rockham sighed as if reluctantly surrendering to duty. It is a pity society is so harsh when private families attempt prudence. A duke's household is not merely a household. It is a burden. Daphne looked down. Caspar has suffered terribly. He didn't want to hurt anyone. No man does, Lady Nerissa said, though her tone made the falsehood elegant. Yet honor sometimes requires pain. Seraphina set down her spoon. Whose pain? No one answered at once. Lady Veyton rescued the table with a laugh. We are all too serious. Lady Daphne, you were speaking earlier of childhood rides at Walcote. Such sweet memories must be better suited to luncheon. Daphne brightened, but there was a caution behind it. Oh yes. Caspar used to visit when I was very small. I always envied Sarah because she was allowed to ride beside him, though she did not always enjoy it. Seraphina looked at her sister. Did I not? There was one morning, Daphne continued, folding memory into innocence, when you were 14, I think. You were meant to ride with Caspar, but you became faint in the yard. Everyone was frightened. I remember Lady Nerissa saying you had overtaxed yourself. The room listened, not to the story, to its usefulness. Caspar's gaze remained on his glass. Lord Walcote said nothing. Lady Nerissa's face held sorrowful confirmation. Seraphina felt a chill move through her, not because the lie was clever, but because it had borrowed enough furniture from truth to stand upright. The mare threw a shoe, she said. Daphne blinked. What? The grey mare threw a shoe before we left the yard. I said I would not ride a lame horse. There was no fainting. Lady Rockham gave a delicate frown. Memory is uncertain after distress. Then let us not build a medical history from it. The words struck more sharply than Seraphina intended, or perhaps exactly as sharply as needed. Caspar looked up. You make it difficult to defend you, Lady Seraphina. I had not noticed you trying. Daphne's eyes filled. Why must you speak so cruelly? Everyone is trying to protect you from harsher talk. No, Seraphina said. Everyone is trying to make the harsher talk sound charitable. The door opened, and Griffin Staveley entered late enough for every person to calculate where he had been. He bowed to Lady Veyton with grave courtesy, then to the table. His eyes found Seraphina's face. In that brief look, she saw fatigue, anger held under discipline, and something else. Knowledge. He had met Dr. March. He knew something concerning her name, her body, her future, and he had come into this room carrying it before placing it in her hands. Lady Veyton, thrilled by the addition, said, Larkmere, you arrive at a delicate moment. Then I hope I improve it by refusing delicacy. Caspar rose halfway from his chair. This does not concern you. Griffin did not sit. It concerned everyone present the moment Lady Seraphina's supposed condition became luncheon air. Lady Rockham stiffened. No one has spoken of condition. No. The room has merely walked around the word unfit until it wore a path in the carpet. The word finally existed. Spoken plainly, it sounded uglier than all the silk that had carried it. Seraphina's hands turned cold. Daphne looked stricken, as if Griffin had insulted her by naming the weapon she had been pleased to hide. Caspar said, If medical concern is your shield, do not turn it into a knife at luncheon. Griffin's eyes remained on him. You mistake me, Caspar said. I acted on advice. Advice from a physician who has not examined Lady Seraphina in 8 years. Silence fell so fast that even Lady Veyton forgot to pretend surprise slowly. Seraphina looked at Griffin. There it was. Confirmation from Dr. March, spoken in public before he had spoken it to her. He had defended her. He had also taken the shape of the very wrong she had named. Lady Nerissa saw the change in Seraphina's face and almost smiled. Griffin saw it too, and the satisfaction left his eyes at once. Seraphina stood. The chair made no sound because she steadied it carefully before rising. I was promised from birth, examined without consent, rejected without hearing, and now defended without being asked. Griffin's face altered, not with pride, not with injury, with recognition. Lady Seraphina, he said quietly. She continued because if she stopped now, the room would write the ending for her. I am tired of men making decisions in my name and calling it protection when I am grateful, or prudence when I am not. Caspar flushed. Lord Walcote looked furious. Daphne whispered, "Sarah, don't." Seraphina turned to her. "Do not worry, Daphne. I am not unwell. I am only awake." Lady Maribel rose beside her, steady as a drawn line. Griffin did not approach. He did not offer his arm. He did not explain Dr. March. He bowed his head before the room that had expected him to be offended. "You are right," he said. The words were simple. They cost him more than argument would have done. Seraphina felt that cost and refused, for now, to soften because of it. Apology was not repair. It was only the first honest stone on a road. She looked at Lady Maribel. "I will go to Kent." Lord Walcote started. "You will do no such thing without my approval. Your approval arranged yesterday's silence and today's luncheon. I will choose my own quiet." Lady Maribel's voice was calm. "My house is open." Lady Nerissa's fan closed slowly. "Flight will be read as admission." "Then let them read poorly," Seraphina said. She moved toward the door with Lady Maribel beside her. No duke led her. No father permitted her. No sister blessed her departure. Behind her, the room remained full of people who had been willing to discuss her as an object until she began to move like a person. At the threshold, she heard Griffin's voice, low and restrained, not following, not claiming. "Lady Seraphina." She paused but did not turn fully. "Every word from Dr. March will be yours before I speak it again." She looked back then just long enough for him to see that she had heard, and that hearing was not forgiveness. "See that it is," she said. Then she left the luncheon, carrying no bracelet, no certificate, and no man's arm, only the decision that exile would not be done to her. If she went to Kent, she would go as strategy, and if truth followed, it would find her standing. At dawn, Walcote House looked less like a home than a place where orders had learned to wear curtains. The corridors were hushed, not with peace, but with listening. Seraphina stood in her bedchamber, while Bess folded the last of her gowns into a traveling trunk and tried not to look frightened by the speed of departure. The cracked bracelet had been removed from the jewel case under Lady Maribel's seal, and now lay wrapped in linen inside her aunt's small black travelling casket. Beside it were Mr. Vale's letter and Griffin's earlier notes. The household ledger itself remained in the records room, because Seraphina would not give Lord Walcote the satisfaction of accusing her of theft. But Lady Maribel had copied the inserted page before breakfast with a hand so steady that fury had made it elegant. Lord Walcote had announced the journey to Kent as if it were his decision. He entered while Seraphina was fastening her gloves and found Lady Maribel already seated near the hearth with the casket on her lap. His expression soured at once. "You will remain at your aunt's house until the unpleasantness settles." Seraphina drew the second glove over her wrist. The place where the bracelet had sat felt strangely bare. "I will go to Lady Maribel's house because I choose it. Do not make phrases out of obedience. Then do not mistake my choice for obedience." Lady Nerissa, Countess of Walcote, entered behind him in pale mourning, silk as composed as if sending a stepdaughter away under scandal were no heavier than revising a guest list. My dear, words matter. If you are seen leaving in defiance, society will assume guilt. Society has assumed much without my help. You will not write to Larkmere, Lord Walcote said. You will receive no calls from him. You will not drag a second duke into a disgrace already damaging enough. Seraphina looked at her father with a steadiness that made Bess pause over the trunk. A second duke was dragged into this when the first one used a hidden paper to reject me before witnesses. His hand tightened on his cane. You forget yourself. No, that is what everyone finds inconvenient. Lady Maribel rose, the casket secure beneath one arm. My lord, my house is not a prison. If Seraphina comes with me, she will read, write, walk, receive proper calls, and think with the liberty due to a woman whose reputation has been injured in public. Lady Nerissa's smile thinned. How noble! One hopes Kent air can soothe theatrical habits. Seraphina turned to her. Do not concern yourself. If truth is theatrical, it is only because falsehood insisted on an audience first. Bess lowered her head quickly, but not before Seraphina saw the flicker of courage in her face. Seraphina crossed to the maid and spoke softly enough that only those near could hear. You are not forgotten. Bess's eyes shone. My lady. Lady Nerissa watched the exchange with quiet displeasure. She said nothing. That silence told Seraphina the promise had struck where it should. The carriage waited before the steps when she came down. The sky was pale and damp, and the gravel still held last night's rain in small dark hollows. Lady Maribel entered first with the casket. Seraphina followed without looking back at the long gallery windows. She had given that room enough of her face. As the carriage rolled toward the gates, she saw Griffin Staveley waiting beyond the stone pillars on a dark horse. He wore no look of triumph, no romantic posture fit for gossip, no impatient demand to speak. He remained far enough from the carriage that Seraphina could ignore him without discourtesy if she wished. That was why she did not. She lifted her eyes to him through the glass. He bowed from the saddle, then let the carriage pass before falling in behind at a respectful distance. Lady Maribel noticed and said nothing for several minutes. The wheels struck the road, and Walcote House diminished behind them. Only when the pillars disappeared did Seraphina allow her shoulders to lower. You may scold me for permitting him to follow, she said. I may, Lady Maribel answered, but I prefer to conserve my strength for better targets. Despite herself, Seraphina almost smiled. He did not ask to escort me. No, he has discovered the rare art of being useful without announcing himself indispensable. The road to Kent unrolled beneath a sky that threatened rain without committing to it. Hedges leaned close, and early leaves flashed silver when the wind turned them. For a while, no one spoke. The quiet was not empty. It was full of the luncheon, of Griffin's public admission, of her own words returning to her with the force of things said too honestly to be called back. I was promised from birth, examined without consent, rejected without hearing, and now defended without being asked. She did not regret them. She regretted that they had been necessary. Near the second milestone, the carriage lurched hard into a rut. Lady Maribel caught the casket with both hands. Seraphina braced herself against the seat as one wheel sank deeper with a wet scrape. The coachman cursed under his breath outside, then remembered himself too late. Hooves sounded behind them. Griffin rode up, but stopped several yards from the door. He did not reach for the handle. He did not call her name like a claim. Lady Maribel, he said, because her aunt was the senior lady present. Shall I send my groom to assist the coachman, or would you prefer I ride ahead for help? Lady Maribel looked to Seraphina. That small transfer of decision mattered. Seraphina opened the carriage window. Send your groom. Remain where you are, Your Grace. Griffin's expression did not change except for the faintest softening around the eyes. As you wish. He turned his horse aside and gave the order. The groom went to the wheel. Griffin remained in the road, holding back a restless horse with one hand, watching not her face, but the work being done, because she had told him not to make himself the center of it. It should not have moved her. It did. When the wheel was freed and the coachman began checking the lining near the carriage floor, a packet slipped from beneath the seat with a dry little fall. Seraphina looked down. Brown paper, folded flat, tucked where no traveller would ordinarily see it unless a jolt or search exposed it. Lady Maribel's eyes narrowed. Do not touch it yet. Seraphina drew back her hand. Griffin, still outside, saw their stillness. Is assistance required? No, Seraphina said. Then, after one breath, a packet has fallen from beneath the lining. He dismounted, but did not approach the door. Do you wish me to send Mr. Pember? Mr. Pember is not here. Then do you wish your aunt to open it? Seraphina looked at him through the open window. This was the moment she had feared without naming. The useful man, the powerful man, the man already connected to Dr. March, and evidence and rooms where her name was spoken. Griffin had begun to ask the right question before he touched the wrong answer. I will open it, she said. Lady Maribel gave her a small nod. Seraphina lifted the packet by one corner and unfolded it. Inside lay an apothecary receipt, the ink dry but recent. Sedative drops, nervous agitation, discretion recommended. Paid on account of Lady Nerissa Walcote. Dated 3 days before the wedding. The words settled into the carriage like a second presence. Lady Maribel's face went white with controlled anger. Before the wedding, she said. Seraphina read the date again. Before Caspar had rejected her. Before she had supposedly become overwrought. Before society had been invited to pity her nerves. It was meant to be found, Seraphina said, later, when they needed more than the certificate. Griffin took one step closer, then stopped himself so visibly that Seraphina saw the old instinct fight the new promise. May I see it? He asked. Then his mouth tightened. No, that is the wrong question. What would you have done with it? The correction changed the air. Lady Maribel looked from him to Seraphina and wisely looked away. Seraphina held the paper while the carriage rocked faintly on its freed wheel. I will read it aloud first. Then my aunt will read it. Then you may hear it if you stand there and do not put it in your pocket as if proof prefers a gentleman's coat. Griffin's eyes met hers. As you wish. She read every word. Her voice did not break until the final phrase, discretion recommended, and even then, it did not break enough to stop. Lady Maribel read it after her, then folded it into a clean paper from her reticule. Only then did Seraphina pass it through the window for Griffin to see without taking it from her custody. He read quickly. His face became very still. This was prepared before any distress they later claimed to fear. Yes, and hidden where it might appear accidental. Yes, Lady Seraphina, he said, quietly, I am sorry. The apology was not for himself. Not yet. It was for what had been done. Seraphina took the receipt back and placed it in Lady Maribel's casket beside the copied ledger page and Mr. Vale's note. The lid closed. Evidence had a home now, and that home was not Harrowdene's pocket, not Walcote's records, not any man's discretion. Griffin stepped away from the carriage door. He lifted his hand, palm open, not touching the wood, not reaching inside. It was an offer with no command inside it. Seraphina looked at that hand for a long moment. Part of her anger remained. It ought to remain. He had still learned from Dr. March before telling her, but he had corrected himself before the receipt crossed from her hand to his. He had obeyed distance. He had asked what she wanted done. Slowly, Seraphina set her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with careful warmth. Not a rescue, not a claim, a held place in the middle of a road where the truth had fallen from beneath her seat. "Do not hide truth from me again," she said, his voice lowered. "I won't. Not to spare me, no. Not to arrive with a finished answer." A shadow crossed his face, almost pain. No, she believed not the promise alone, but the way he let it cost him. For several breaths, they remained that way. Her hand in his, Lady Maribel silent beside the evidence casket. The groom fastening the last strap, the damp road smelling of mud and leaves. When Seraphina loosened her fingers, Griffin released her at once. The carriage moved on toward Kent. Behind it, Griffin rode at the same respectful distance as before, but everything had changed. The road was still uncertain, the slander still alive, and Dr. March's words still waited behind a door. Yet Seraphina sat with the receipt secured, the bracelet guarded, and the first warmth of chosen trust resting in her palm long after his hand had gone. Lady Maribel Ashford's house in Kent had none of Walcote House's appetite for display. It stood beyond a low meadow near the Larkmere Road, built of warm brick darkened by age, with clipped yews, before the door, and a south garden where lavender leaned over the path without asking permission to be admired. Seraphina slept there badly, but honestly. No ancestral portraits watched her. No stepmother's keys turned in the passage. No half-finished wedding flowers stood accusingly in bowls. The evidence casket rested in Lady Maribel's keeping beside her bed, locked and wrapped in plain linen. Inside lay the cracked bracelet, Mr. Vale's letter, the copied ledger page, Griffin's earlier notes, and the apothecary receipt found beneath the carriage lining. Dr. March's words had not yet joined them. That absence felt like a door in the wall. Griffin had ridden on to Larkmere Park after seeing the carriage safely to Lady Maribel's gates the previous evening. He had not asked to come in. He had not sent some heroic midnight explanation. At 10 the next morning, however, a footman brought a note written in Griffin's controlled hand. His Grace requested permission to call at noon, in Lady Maribel's presence, to deliver information concerning Dr. Selwyn March, and to apologize for the manner in which it had first been obtained. Seraphina read the note twice. The apology was named before the evidence. That mattered. It did not erase the luncheon. It did not soften the moment when he had spoken of Dr. March before telling her what he knew. But it placed the wound in the right order. Lady Maribel, seated beside the breakfast table, watched her over the rim of her teacup. "Will you receive him?" "In the garden," Seraphina said. "With you within sight." A wise tyrant could not have arranged it better. Seraphina folded the note. "I have known enough tyrants to improve the method." At noon, Griffin came not in polished London splendor, but in riding coat and plain gloves, dust at the hem and restraint in every movement. He was announced at the garden door. Lady Maribel took her place upon a bench near the yew walk, close enough to hear raised voices, and far enough to grant conversation dignity. Seraphina stood beside a stone bench, where a bowl of cut lavender had been left by some thoughtful hand. When Griffin approached, he bowed first to Lady Maribel, then to Seraphina. "Lady Seraphina." "Your Grace." The formality sat between them. He did not try to disturb it with charm. I owe you the apology before the information. She looked at him steadily. Yes. His mouth tightened, not in offense, but in acknowledgement. I met Dr. March because I was angry on your behalf and because he refused to receive you. I told myself speed was necessary. I told myself I could spare you another closed door by bringing the answer back finished. He looked down once, then back at her. That was the mistake. You have been injured by people making arrangements around your name. I made myself another door you had to wait behind. The words reached her with painful precision. Had he defended himself, she could have resisted more easily. Had he spoken only in guilt, she could have dismissed it as vanity turned inside out. But he had named the structure of the harm, not merely his part in its inconvenience. Seraphina rested one gloved hand on the back of the stone bench. Why did you think you had to know before I did? He did not answer quickly. A thrush moved in the hedge. From the house came the faint sound of crockery, then silence again. Because I wanted to arrive with certainty, he said. I thought uncertainty was another cruelty to you. And because I am accustomed to entering rooms with answers in my hand. It has been called competence often enough that I mistook it for virtue. And now I think arriving with answers can be another way of taking the room. Something in her chest loosened and hurt at once. I am not grateful for being spared the first sight of truth. No, even ugly truth, especially then. He drew a folded packet from inside his coat, but did not hold it out. He placed it on the stone bench between them, close enough for her to take, far enough not to press. These are my notes, and this is Dr. March's own written acknowledgement. He would not sign a full confession. Not yet, but he admits he did not examine you in relation to the Harrowdene marriage. He has not crossed Walcote threshold in 8 years. The certificate's language was supplied through a lady of the household, who claimed to understand what must be implied without indelicate particulars. Seraphina did not reach for the paper at once. The garden seemed suddenly too green, too alive, too indifferent to the fact that a man had signed away her future without seeing her. Lady Nerissa. He did not name her. No, men who sell injury often keep just enough courtesy to protect the purchaser. Griffin's eyes darkened. He is in debt. There were promises of payment, introductions, and relief from certain obligations. He called it a misunderstanding. Seraphina picked up the packet. Her fingers were steady until she saw Dr. March's signature. Selwyn March. 8 years since he had taken her pulse for a sore throat and recommended lemon barley water. Now his hand had lent authority to a lie about her nerves, her marriage, and the children Harrowdene had expected her to bear like future entries in a ledger. She read the note once, then again. Misunderstanding is a respectable word for purchased injury. Griffin said nothing. That silence helped more than agreement would have done. She folded the note carefully. Does Caspar know Dr. March did not examine me? I do not know how much he knows. I suspect he preferred not to ask. Preference can be very comfortable. Preference can be guilt when a man profits by ignorance. The answer was severe but not theatrical. Seraphina looked at him then. Truly looked. The man before her was powerful enough to crush several reputations by breakfast if he chose. Yet here he stood in her aunt's garden, explaining how he had been wrong. That did not make him safe in all things. But it made him capable of becoming safer, which was rarer. From this moment, she said, no paper concerning my name, my health, my future, or my reputation is to be handled without my knowledge. Yes, not because you judge it wise to tell me. No, because the knowledge is yours before it is useful to me. She held his gaze. And if I ask you to stand aside, I will stand aside. If I ask you to stand beside me," his voice softened, "then beside you." The lavender moved in the breeze between them. Seraphina set Dr. March's note into her reticule. It would go into Lady Marable's casket, but not before she had decided where and how. "Tell me the rest." Griffin drew a slow breath. "Harrowdene and Lady Daphne have announced a second betrothal presentation in 10 days at Walcote House. The reset pendant miniature will be displayed as ceremonial token of the corrected alliance, same long gallery." Lady Marabelle from the yew walk turned sharply. Seraphina felt the past reach for her ankles. Bridal white, chapel ribbons, Caspar's paper, Daphne beside him. "They want the same room." "Yes, because if I remain in Kent, absence becomes consent." "Yes, and if I return unprepared, they finish what they began." "That is likely." Griffin did not add what he could do. He did not promise to storm the gallery. He waited, as if her silence had authority. Seraphina looked across the meadow where the road bent toward Larkmere. "I will not be hidden while my sister wears a piece of my promise as peace. Then I will stand where you ask." A faint, unwilling smile touched her mouth. "You make that sound easy. It is not. I have been useful through control for most of my life. I am attempting to become useful through obedience, and I find it a severe education." This time her smile stayed. "You suffer nobly. I intend to make it my finest quality." The lightness did not remove the danger, but it let breath enter the space between them. Before Seraphina could answer, hurried footsteps sounded on the gravel. Bess appeared at the garden gate, flushed, bonnet askew, escorted by Lady Marable's gardener, who looked deeply alarmed to have become part of aristocratic intrigue. "My lady," Bess said, dropping a curtsy that nearly became a stumble. "Forgive me. I came as quick as I could. Miss Daphne's maid, Mabel Reed, has been dismissed, sent off without a character. Cook heard her crying that she had something belonging to Lady Seraphina from the bracelet. Then she was put into a hired cart on the Canterbury Road." Seraphina's hand tightened around the reticule containing Dr. March's note. Griffin's expression sharpened, but he did not speak first. He had learned at least that much. Lady Marabelle rose. "Did Mabel say what she had?" "No, my lady. Only that Miss Daphne told her to burn it, and she didn't." The garden seemed to narrow to one path, one cart road, one frightened maid carrying the piece that might finish what the bracelet had begun. Seraphina looked at Griffin. Without thinking, she reached out and rested her fingers briefly on his sleeve. Not for support. Not because she had forgiven everything, because he had apologized before evidence, because he had waited, because the next step would need both power and restraint. He went very still beneath the touch and did not cover her hand. She withdrew when she chose. "We find Mabel," she said, "together. With my aunt's knowledge, with Mr. Pember's witness, if possible, and with no decision made before I hear what she carries." Griffin bowed his head. "As you wish." Seraphina turned toward Lady Marabelle. "Aunt, may I borrow your carriage again?" Lady Marable's eyes shone with fierce approval. "My dear, for truth, you may wear out the wheels." The apology had not ended the injury. The note had not restored her name. The road ahead still held Daphne, Caspar, Lady Nerissa, and the long gallery waiting like a wound reopened by invitation. But as Seraphina walked back toward the house with Dr. March's note in her reticule and Griffin beside rather than before her, she felt the shape of the story change. They had made her a rumor. Now the rumor had begun to acquire witnesses. The coaching inn on the Canterbury Road looked too ordinary to hold the next piece of Seraphina's ruin. Its yard smelled of wet straw, horses, and ale, and a red-faced ostler was shouting over a loose trace as if no one's reputation had ever depended upon a frightened maid and a scrap of broken metal. Lady Marable's carriage drew in beneath the inn sign just after 3, followed by Mr. Pember's hired chaise and Griffin on horseback. Seraphina had insisted upon the order before they left Kent. She would not arrive like a lady carried into battle by a duke. She would arrive with her aunt, with a solicitor, and with her own questions ready. Griffin dismounted only after her carriage stopped, then stood aside, while Lady Marabelle stepped down with the evidence casket beneath one arm. Inside it lay the cracked bracelet, Mr. Vale's letter, the copied ledger page, Griffin's earlier notes, and the apothecary receipt. Dr. March's note remained in Seraphina's reticule until she chose to place it with the rest. That small distinction mattered to her more than she could explain. The innkeeper, alarmed by the arrival of so much rank and so little explanation, conducted them to a small private parlour smelling of beeswax and last night's fire. Mabel Reed was already there, seated near the cold hearth with a bundle clutched to her lap. Bess had described her as Daphne's maid, but fear had stripped the girl of all household polish. Her cap was crushed, her eyes swollen, and her hands tightened around the bundle as if it were both danger and protection. When Griffin entered behind Mr. Pember, she shot to her feet. "I haven't stolen anything, Your Grace. I swear I haven't." Seraphina stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Then we will not begin by calling you a thief." Mabel stared at her. Recognition broke through panic. "Lady Seraphina, you served my sister." "Yes, my lady, and you were dismissed without a character." Mabel's mouth trembled. Her ladyship said no honest house would take a girl who listened where she wasn't wanted. Lady Marabelle sat with the casket upon the table. "Then we are fortunate. This house is not being asked to judge honesty by Lady Nerissa's convenience." Mr. Pember opened his writing case, but he did not dip his pen. "Miss Reed, you will be asked only what you saw, heard, or carried, not what you guess." Mabel looked from him to Griffin and then to Seraphina. "If I tell it, Lady Daphne will say I was paid." "You will not be paid for a lie," Seraphina said. "If your account is true, you will be protected, because truth should not cost a servant her bread." Those words seemed to do what comfort could not. Mabel sat again, though her knees nearly gave way before she found the chair. She untied the bundle. From inside a square of muslin, she lifted a bent piece of gold and enamel no larger than a child's thumb joint. Seraphina's breath caught. It was not the decorative panel Daphne wore at her throat. That stolen piece had already been reset as a pendant miniature. This was the broken clasp frame from Seraphina's bracelet, twisted at one edge, with the tiny maker's mark still stamped inside the hinge where Mr. Vale's hand had left its signature years ago, a small injury, preserved against command. Mabel placed it on the table and drew back as if it might accuse her by proximity. "I found it in Miss Daphne's dressing room after the wedding morning," she whispered. "She told me to burn it. I didn't." Griffin did not touch the clasp. Neither did Mr. Pember. Seraphina leaned closer, but kept her hands folded. "Tell me from the beginning." Mabel swallowed. "A fortnight before the wedding, Miss Daphne asked me to fetch a ribbon box from your dressing room, while Bess was below stairs. Your jewel case was open, because the wedding ornaments had been laid out for inspection. Miss Daphne held the bracelet then. She said it was monstrous that a baby should be promised a duke before anyone knew whether she would deserve him." Seraphina felt Lady Marabelle stiffen beside her. Mabel twisted her apron in both hands. She found the little decorative panel beneath the clasp. It did not come away cleanly then, only loosened. Lady Nerissa came in and told her not to be a fool with shaking fingers. Later, I was ordered to accompany them to Mr. Vale's workshop. Miss Daphne wore a veil. Lady Nerissa wore grey gloves with the Walcote crest. The panel had been pried free by then, and Lady Nerissa said it was an old family piece to be reset on a ribbon. She paid for haste and told Mr. Vale questions were not a virtue in tradesmen. Mr. Pember's pen began to move. The scratching sound was steady enough to keep the room from dissolving into outrage. Seraphina looked at the broken clasp frame. And the morning of the wedding, Miss Daphne went to you before the procession. When she came back, she was white. She had cracked the clasp worse by pressing it while it was on your wrist. She said she only meant to make certain it looked distressed, so everyone would believe you had damaged it if trouble came. Lady Nerissa said the crack would serve. She took the larger pieces, but this bit had fallen into the rug. I saw it after they left, and she told you to burn it. Yes, my lady. She said if I kept scraps, I'd learn how quickly scraps of girls were thrown away. Lady Marrable's face went pale with fury. Griffin looked at the window for one hard moment, as if the grey afternoon beyond it could absorb the anger he would not put into the room. Seraphina remained still, because Mabel needed her to remain a lady who could hear truth without punishing the person who brought it. "What of the certificate?" she asked. Mabel drew a breath that shuddered. "I carried a folded note to Dr. March's rooms 2 days before the wedding. I did not read it. I swear I didn't. But I saw the answer upon Lady Nerissa's escritoire when she sent me for sealing wax. It said the wording would serve if Harrowdene preferred discretion." "Did Harrowdene know?" Griffin asked quietly. Mabel flinched at the title but answered. "The Duke of Harrowdene came to Lady Nerissa's small library before the gallery. Lady Daphne was there, crying with the bracelet in her lap. Not the whole bracelet, my lady, the damaged clasp and the ribbon box." Lady Nerissa showed him the broken frame and said the certificate would do the rest if Lady Seraphina made trouble. He asked whether the broken thing mattered. Her voice dropped. Lady Nerissa said it mattered only if he let it. He said Daphne would make a softer duchess. For a moment, the little parlour lost every sound but the scrape of Mr. Pember's pen stopping. Seraphina looked down at her gloved hands. Caspar had not been deceived by an unavoidable misunderstanding. He had stood in the long gallery, after seeing enough to know there was something broken, before Seraphina could have broken it in jealousy. He had chosen not to ask, because not asking gave him Daphne. The pain of it was oddly clean. There was no affection left to confuse it, only the knowledge that his weakness had needed her disgrace for shelter. There was also the apothecary paper, Mabel added, as if confessing now required emptying every pocket of fear. Lady Nerissa said it should be hidden where it might be found if anyone doubted your nerves. I was ordered to put it beneath the carriage lining. I couldn't. I gave it to one of the men instead. I don't know which one placed it there. Seraphina opened her reticule and removed Dr. March's note. She set it beside the casket. Then she nodded to Mr. Pember. "Take her statement." Mabel's eyes filled. "My lady, if I sign, I'll never serve in a great house again. Perhaps not in a house that fears honest memory." Lady Marrable's voice softened without weakening. "But you will not be left to the road. I know a widowed cousin near Sevenoaks who values plain truth more than polished lies. If she cannot take you, I will." "And you are not buying this from me, Mabel?" asked Seraphina. "No, I am asking you to tell only what happened. If you do not know a thing, say you do not know it. Truth does not improve when decorated." Mabel signed with a shaking hand. Mr. Pember witnessed it, then wrapped the broken clasp frame in clean paper, marked its description, and placed it in Lady Marable's casket beside the other evidence. The casket closed with a small, certain click. Only then did Seraphina realize her own hands were trembling. Not prettily, not in the delicate manner Lady Rocombe might have forgiven. Her body shook with delayed grief, with anger held too long under manners, with the sudden understanding that betrayal had not been a storm, but a series of careful errands. Griffin saw it. He took one step, then stopped. "May I hold you?" he asked. The room grew very quiet. Lady Marabelle turned her face toward the window. Mr. Pember busied himself with blotting the statement, though the ink was already dry. Seraphina looked at Griffin. He had asked before evidence, asked before touch, asked even when tenderness would have been easy to excuse. She crossed the distance herself and stepped into his arms. He held her with careful strength, one hand at her back, the other still, never tightening as if distress granted him rights. Her forehead rested against his coat for one breath. Then two. "I am so angry," she whispered. His voice was low above her. "Good. Let it keep you standing until justice can take its place." She drew back when she chose. He released her at once. A knock came at the parlor door before either could speak again. The innkeeper entered, followed by a Walcote groom carrying a sealed letter ridden hard from Hertfordshire. Lady Marabelle broke it, read, and handed it to Seraphina. The message was brief and formal. In 10 days, Caspar Rowntree, Duke of Harrowdene, and Lady Daphne Walcote would present their corrected betrothal in the Long Gallery at Walcote House, before family, patronesses, and clergy. The reset pendant miniature would serve as the ceremonial token. Seraphina folded the letter and looked at the evidence casket. "They want the same room." Griffin's gaze did not leave her face. "Then we shall not deny them." Seraphina touched the sealed casket once, not for comfort, but to mark the weight of what now traveled with her. "No," she said, "we shall bring back everything they left behind." For 10 days, Seraphina imagined the return to Walcote House not as a journey, but as a hand reopening a door that had once closed upon her name. Yet, when the carriage turned between the stone pillars and the familiar windows rose beyond the sweep of gravel, she felt no collapse of courage, no bridal ghost stepping into her place. She sat beside Lady Marabelle Ashford with her gloves folded in her lap and the evidence casket between them, a plain black box that contained more truth than Walcote House had managed in generations. Inside lay the cracked enamel bracelet, wrapped in linen, Mr. Vale's letter, the copied ledger page, Griffin's earlier notes, the apothecary receipt, Dr. March's guarded admission, and the broken clasp frame with Mr. Vale's maker's mark now sealed in Mr. Pember's careful paper. The enamel flake with the pale blue silk thread had been added the previous afternoon, transferred by Griffin in Seraphina's presence. He had placed it on the table before her, still folded in its small packet, and had waited while she decided where it belonged. That mattered. Every movement of evidence now had a witness, a hand, and a reason. Nothing would appear like a miracle. Nothing would vanish into a gentleman's pocket. Behind Lady Marabelle's carriage came Mr. Pember's chaise, bearing the solicitor and his clerk, both sombre and dusted from the road. A second carriage followed with Bess, Mabel Reed, and Lady Marabelle's own maid as proper attendant. Dr. Selwyn March had been summoned separately and was expected at Walcote House, though Seraphina trusted his fear more than his conscience. Griffin rode beside the carriage until the house appeared. Then, just as he had promised, he fell back. He would not make her arrival look like a duke delivering damaged goods for inspection. He would stand beside her when asked, not before her, not above her, not as the author of her vindication. The house had dressed itself for correction. White flowers stood in the entrance hall again, fewer than on the wedding morning, but arranged with the same cold confidence. Footmen wore full livery. A clergyman's carriage waited near the stable court. The long gallery windows were open to the mild air, and beyond them Seraphina could already imagine the portraits looking down with the old Walcote talent for witnessing without interfering. Lady Maribel touched the casket. "Are you ready?" Seraphina looked at the front steps where Lord Walcote stood beside Lady Nerissa, Countess of Walcote. Her father's face was stiff with displeasure. Lady Nerissa wore grey gloves. Of course she did. "No," Seraphina said, "but I am finished being postponed until I am ready." The carriage door opened. Lady Maribel descended first, casket secure beneath her arm. Seraphina followed, gravel pressed beneath her shoes. The air smelled of cut flowers and polished stone, too similar to the morning that had nearly remade her into rumour. Griffin dismounted several paces away and handed his reins to a groom. He did not approach until Lady Maribel had moved ahead with Mr. Pember. Then he came to Seraphina's side, close enough for speech, distant enough for choice. "Lady Seraphina, Your Grace, where would you have me?" The question was not new. That was why it steadied her. A man could ask once and be admired. To ask again after power had already been granted was character. "Beside me," she said, "not before me." His eyes held hers. "Beside you." They crossed the threshold. Lord Walcote moved at once. "Seraphina, this has gone far enough. I allowed your aunt to bring you because absence would have worsened speculation, but I will not have servants paraded before family." Seraphina looked past him, to Bess and Mabel, who had just stepped from the second carriage. Bess's hands shook around her reticule. Mabel's chin lifted despite her pale face. "Servants had places in the lie," Seraphina said. "They will have places in the truth." Lady Nerissa's gaze slid toward Mabel like a blade drawn halfway. "That girl is dismissed from my daughter's service and has no character." "Then she has less to lose by telling the truth than most people here," Lady Maribel said. Mr. Pember bowed to Lord Walcote with professional chill. "My lord, I am here to record statements, not to disturb ceremony, though I confess ceremony and truth seem likely to meet today." Griffin's mouth moved almost invisibly. Seraphina did not smile. The urge itself was enough. Lord Walcote's face darkened, but he stood aside because too many eyes had gathered in the hall. News of a confrontation travelled through great houses faster than servants carrying trays. By the time Seraphina reached the long gallery, the room was ready to pretend it had not been waiting for her. Caspar Rowntree, Duke of Harrowdene, stood beneath the central portrait, dressed in deep blue, with his handsome features tightened into gracious endurance. Daphne stood beside him in pale blue silk, the reset pendant miniature resting at her throat on a fresh ribbon. The stolen decorative enamel panel gleamed above her bodice, bright and dainty, as if polished innocence could undo origin. Lady Rockham sat near Lady Veyton and two other patronesses. The clergyman stood by the fireplace, with the weary discomfort of a man beginning to understand that respectability did not always prefer righteousness. Dr. March had arrived and stood half-hidden near the bookshelves, looking at the carpet as if it might open and receive him. Mr. Vale was not present in body, but his sealed letter lay ready in the casket. The room saw Griffin enter behind Seraphina and altered itself again, not in favour, but in calculation. Caspar's eyes narrowed. Larkmere, your persistence is becoming a spectacle. Then it is fortunate I am not the most spectacular thing in the room. Griffin's gaze touched Daphne's pendant and moved away. Lady Rokum's fan snapped open. We are gathered for a restored alliance, not another exhibition of resentment. Seraphina stepped forward. Then let us begin with the word restored. Daphne lifted one hand to the pendant. Cesar, please, I know this is difficult. I don't want you to suffer again. Then answer plainly. Seraphina's voice carried down the gallery, beneath the portraits, through the hush that had once carried Caspar's rejection. Who first called me unfit? The question landed without ornament. No one answered. Lady Nerissa lowered her lashes, sorrow arranged for display. Lord Walcote looked toward Caspar. Caspar looked toward Daphne. Daphne's mouth trembled. It was an old performance, but now too many people had begun watching the seams. I never wanted that word, Daphne whispered. I only wanted what was best for everyone. Who first called me unfit? Seraphina repeated. Dr. March shifted near the shelves. Mr. Pember's clerk dipped his pen. The scratch of it made Lady Nerissa look up sharply. This is improper, she said. My daughter is not to be interrogated in her own house. It is also my house, Seraphina said, a fact everyone remembered when I was useful to bargain with. Caspar stepped forward with impatient polish. Lady Seraphina, this bitterness does you no service. The miniature will be presented, the engagement will be recognized, and society will be permitted to forget a painful confusion. Society has shown no wish to forget my supposed defects. Lady Veyton's fan stilled. Daphne drew herself up suddenly, tears brightening her eyes as if courage had visited her by candlelight. Then let the symbol answer. If you think I fear it, I don't. I will fasten it myself for everyone to see. Lady Nerissa's hand moved. A warning, quick and sharp. Daphne either did not see it or had gone too far into performance to stop. She untied the ribbon from her throat and stepped toward the velvet display pad prepared on the central table. The reset enamel panel lay in her palm, tiny, shining, stolen. Seraphina did not move. Griffin stood beside her, silent as promised. Mr. Pember watched with the merciless attention of a man who understood that hands often confessed before mouths. Daphne bent over the display pad and tried to fasten the pendant to its ribbon hook. Her fingers went first to the wrong side, pressing and turning as if seeking the old hidden mechanism beneath Seraphina's bracelet clasp rather than the new pendant fitting Mr. Vale had made. The motion lasted no more than a breath. It was enough. Mabel made a small sound near the door and covered it too late. Daphne froze. Colour drained from her face, leaving her beauty suddenly young, naked, and frightened. Lady Nerissa's fan closed with a sound like a verdict. Seraphina turned to Mr. Pember. Now. The solicitor opened the evidence casket. The click was small, but every head in the long gallery turned toward it. One by one, truth prepared to stand where rumour had stood first. Mr. Pember did not raise his voice. That was what made the long gallery listen. A shouted accusation might have allowed Lady Nerissa to call the scene vulgar, Caspar to demand masculine order, and Lady Rokum to retreat behind a fanful of injured dignity. But the solicitor's quiet, made refusal looked like fear. He set the evidence casket open upon the central table and removed the first linen-wrapped object, the Harrowdene Walcote enamel bracelet, he said. Watched the cracked circle emerge into the same room where it had been used to measure her ruin. The lilies and hawks were dulled by damage, but not erased, Mr. Pember placed it on the velvet pad beside Daphne's reset pendant miniature, which still lay where her frightened fingers had abandoned it. The bracelet remained in Lady Seraphina Walcote's possession after the interrupted wedding, then under Lady Maribel Ashford's seal, and later within this casket. Its movement has been witnessed. He unwrapped the second object. The broken clasp frame, preserved by Mabel Reed, formerly made to Lady Daphne. It bears Miss Vale's maker's mark inside the hinge, Daphne whispered. No. Lady Nerissa's gloved hand closed around the edge of her fan, but she did not move Mr. Pember aligned the broken clasp frame against the damaged bracelet, then placed Daphne's pendant near the vacant setting beneath the clasp. Even from across the room, the truth had shape. The decorative enamel panel at Daphne's throat had not been an old family miniature. It was the missing heart of Seraphina's bracelet. Lady Veyton rose halfway from her chair before remembering herself. Lady Rockham stared as if workmanship had become treason. Griffin stood beside Seraphina and said nothing. He had promised beside, not before. His silence steadied the room more powerfully than interruption could have done. Mr. Pember lifted Mr. Vale's letter. Mr. Vale confirms that the decorative enamel panel, now reset as a pendant, was brought to his London workshop by Lady Daphne Walcote. She was accompanied by an older lady, wearing grey gloves embroidered with the Walcote crest. Haste was requested and paid for. He was told not to inquire whether the piece had been removed from a larger ornament. All eyes turned, almost unwillingly, to Lady Nerissa's gloves. She smiled with icy grace. Tradesmen are famous for remembering whatever increases their importance. Seraphina turned toward her, and stepmothers are famous, apparently, for thinking servants and tradesmen cannot count. A tremor moved through the gallery. Mr. Pember unfolded the small paper Griffin had surrendered the day before in Seraphina's presence. An enamel flake from the long gallery floor after the wedding morning. A pale blue silk thread remains caught in the broken edge. He held it near the light. The color corresponds with Lady Daphne's gown that morning. Daphne's tears came at last, but they lack direction. I embraced her. Sisters embrace before weddings. It's not a crime to touch a bracelet. No, Seraphina said, but it is a crime against the soul to break what belongs to another woman, and then wear the broken heart of it as proof that you were chosen. Daphne flinched as if the words had touched her cheek. You had everything, she said, and the childishness beneath the silk finally showed. Lessons, jewels, expectations, Caspar. From your cradle, everyone spoke, as if your future were grand and mine were whatever remained beside it. So you made mine a sickness? Seraphina asked. Daphne looked away. Lady Nerissa stepped forward before the silence could become confession. Enough. My daughter was trying to save this family from a dangerous alliance. Lady Seraphina's instability is now being performed before everyone who doubted it. Lady Maribel rose from her chair, small and formidable. Do not call a woman unstable because she has survived the arrangements made to silence her. Mr. Pember removed the copied ledger page. The household health ledger contains an inserted sheet. It is written in newer ink. The initials do not match the steward responsible for the surrounding entries. The page recasts ordinary incidents as evidence of nervous delicacy and mentions Dr. Selwyn March regarding future expectations. Bess stood near the door, with both hands clasped before her apron. When Mr. Pember looked toward her, she took one step forward. Her voice shook, but it did not fail. Lady Nerissa ordered the records room key the night before the wedding. She sent Mrs. Hobb away. Lady Daphne came after. I heard rest and certificate. Her ladyship later told me I was mistaken before I had said what I'd seen. Lady Nerissa's eyes flashed. Ungrateful girl. Honest girl, Seraphina said. Bess's spine straightened. Mr. Pember laid down the apothecary receipt next. Sedative drops purchased 3 days before the wedding through Lady Nerissa Walcote's household account. The receipt was hidden beneath Lady Seraphina's carriage lining and found on the road to Kent. Lady Seraphina states she never took such drops. The purchase predates the distress it was meant to prove. Griffin's voice entered then, quiet and exact. A remedy bought before the supposed illness is not care. It is preparation. Lady Nerissa's composure thinned. Women of delicate nature often require precautions. Then why hide the receipt? Seraphina asked. The Countess did not answer. Dr. Selwyn March shifted near the shelves, face grey. Mr. Pember lifted another paper. Dr. March has already provided a written admission that he did not examine Lady Seraphina in relation to the Harrowdene marriage. He further admits the certificate's language was supplied through a lady of the household. Caspar turned sharply. March, be careful. The physician looked at him and seemed to discover that fear could change owners. I was indebted, Dr. March said. I was told the family required discretion. I signed wording placed before me. I had not seen Lady Seraphina for 8 years. I cannot say she suffers the condition implied. Cannot, Griffin said, or will not. Doctor. March closed his eyes briefly. She does not, to my knowledge. The words did not heal. They cut the bandage from the wound. Seraphina felt the room shift as everyone who had enjoyed the rumor now searched for a safer expression. Mr. Pember looked toward Mabel Reed. The young maid stepped forward, pale but determined. Lady Daphne loosened the decorative enamel panel before the wedding. Lady Nerissa had it reset. On the wedding morning, Lady Daphne pressed the clasp while embracing Lady Seraphina and cracked it worse. I found the broken clasp frame in her dressing room. She told me to burn it. Daphne covered her mouth. Lady Nerissa said, a dismissed maid repeating resentment. No, Mabel said, voice suddenly clearer. A dismissed maid repeating what she was ordered to destroy. Mr. Pember nodded once. Miss Reed also states that the Duke of Harrowdene saw the damaged clasp before his declaration. The gallery became still. Caspar's handsome face hardened into something smaller than pride. Seraphina turned to him. You saw it? I saw a broken trinket in a confused morning. You saw enough to ask whether it mattered. His eyes flickered. Mabel spoke again before fear could reclaim her. You asked, Your Grace. Lady Nerissa said it would matter only if Lady Seraphina made trouble. Then you said Lady Daphne would make a softer Duchess. The words remained in the gallery after Mabel finished, hanging beneath the portraits like smoke no open window could remove. Caspar drew himself up. I was misled. Any gentleman in my position would have relied upon family assurances. Any weak gentleman, Griffin said. Seraphina raised one hand slightly. Griffin stopped. He had heard her without a word. She faced Caspar alone. You were free to prefer Daphne. You were free to end an engagement you never wanted. You were not free to make me less than whole so that your preference could look honorable. Caspar's color rose. You would never have suited Harrowdene. Perhaps not, Seraphina said. Harrowdene appears to require a duchess willing to live beneath convenient lies. Lady Rocombe gasped, but Lady Veyton did not. She was watching Seraphina with the calculating respect of a woman already composing a new version of what everyone had always believed. Lord Walcote finally spoke, his voice rough. "Seraphina, think what this does to the family." She turned to her father, and the last child in her, who had waited for him to choose her, went quiet. "I have thought of the family all my life. I was taught to sit, smile, ride, write, dress, and marry for it. Today, the family may think what it did to me." Mr. Pember closed the evidence casket, but the proof had already left it. It stood in Bess's trembling honesty, in Mabel's ruined employment, in Dr. March's lowered eyes, in Daphne's tears stripped of charm, in Lady Nerissa's gloves, no longer able to hide the hand inside them. Griffin stepped forward only after Seraphina had finished. "From this hour," he said, "Larkmere will withdraw acquaintance, patronage, and political goodwill from any household that repeats the false charge against Lady Seraphina's constitution. Let no one mistake rank for shelter. Lady Seraphina owes no man gratitude for believing what evidence proves." No applause came. Applause would have made the moment cheap. Instead, silence changed sides. Daphne sank into a chair. Caspar looked toward the door and found no dignity waiting there. Lady Nerissa stood rigid, but every person present had seen the grey gloves. Lord Walcote's gaze fell to the casket, and Seraphina knew he understood that settlement papers would be next. The long gallery had not become kind. It had become unable to pretend. Later, after statements had been signed, and Mr. Pember had gathered the papers, Seraphina stepped through the side doors onto the terrace alcove. Evening touched the stone balustrade. Behind her, the room still murmured over the wreckage of its certainty. Griffin stopped at the threshold. "May I join you?" he asked. Seraphina looked back. Yes. He came no closer than propriety allowed, while Lady Maribel remained visible through the open doors. For a while, neither spoke. Then Griffin said, "I would like to court you properly, if you freely permit it, not to repair your name, not to make a prize of your gratitude, because I love the courage with which you refuse to become what they named you." Her breath caught. "And if I say no, then I will honor the no and remain glad truth stood where it did today." That answer reached places flattery could not. "Griffin," she said, and his name softened the evening. His eyes changed. "May I kiss you, Seraphina?" The question came without pressure, without certainty, without any presumption that rescue had earned reward. She stepped closer by her own choice. "Yes," she said, "because I choose it." He lowered his head slowly enough that refusal would still have been possible until the last breath. The kiss was gentle, brief, and reverent, a promise touched to her mouth rather than taken from it. When he drew back, she did not retreat. "I love you," he said, low and unguarded, "not because you were wronged, but because I have seen who you are when others tried to write over you." Seraphina looked at the man who had erred, learned, waited, and asked. "I love you, Griffin," she said, "and I choose you freely." Behind them, the long gallery held the pieces of the lie. Before them, evening opened with no promise imposed, only one beginning answered by two willing hearts. 3 months after the long gallery lost the power to lie, Lady Seraphina Walcote stood in the morning room of Lady Maribel Ashford's Kent house and watched her father sign away the last legal hold he had mistaken for paternal right. The paper lay before Mr. Pember on a small walnut desk weighted by an inkstand and the silence of 3 witnesses. Emery Walcote, Earl of Walcote, had arrived wearing dignity like a coat that no longer fit. He did not look at Seraphina when he signed the revised settlement, securing her portion beyond his control. He looked instead at the window, the carpet, the seal, anywhere except the daughter he had once offered to Harrowdene, as if birth, training, and obedience were entries in an account book. Lady Maribel stood near the hearth, her face composed, and her hands folded tightly enough to reveal the emotion she would not spend upon him. "There," Lord Walcote said when the final stroke was dry. "It is done." Seraphina looked at the page, then at him. "No, my lord, it is corrected." He flinched, not greatly, but enough. Mr. Pember sanded the ink with grave care. "The duplicate will remain among my papers. Lady Seraphina will retain her copy." Lord Walcote's mouth tightened. "You have been thorough. I have learned from my family," Seraphina said. "Carelessness with paper can be costly." He had no answer to that. Walcote House had changed in ways no announcement could soften. Lady Nerissa, Countess of Walcote, had surrendered the household keys after Lady Maribel refused to leave Hertfordshire until Mrs. Hobb was restored to authority and Bess protected from dismissal. The image had reached Seraphina by letter. Lady Nerissa, placing the key ring on the breakfast room table, grey gloves motionless, while servants pretended not to understand that command could lose its shape without a single raised voice. Bess remained at Walcote House by her own choice, now under Mrs. Hobb's protection, with Lady Maribel's written promise of employment should any threat return. Mabel Reed had been placed with Lady Maribel's widowed cousin near Sevenoaks, where truth was not considered a defect in service. Dr. Selwyn March's signed confession lay sealed among Mr. Pember's papers, along with a copy of the false certificate before the original was destroyed in Mr. Pember's office grate. Seraphina had watched the paper blacken. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt relief so quiet it resembled fatigue. The accusation was gone, but what it had revealed about the people who had used it would remain. Daphne had been sent to a strict relation in Bath after Harrowdene withdrew in a letter cold enough to freeze vanity at the root. She had written once to Seraphina, a page full of tears, excuses, and the old complaint that Seraphina had always had everything. Seraphina had not answered at once. When she did, the letter was brief. "You mistook being unseen for permission to erase me. I hope one day you learn the difference." Caspar Rowntree left London before the season ended, not ruined in law, but diminished in drawing rooms, which wounded a man like him more accurately. Lady Veyton sent a formal note to 3 patronesses retracting the medical rumour and stating that no charge against Lady Seraphina's constitution had been sustained. It was not an apology. It was better than that. It was a correction society could repeat without pretending to be kind. Through all of it, Griffin Staveley, Duke of Larkmere, did exactly what he had promised. He wrote. The first letter arrived the morning after the reckoning, in his own hand, with one ink blot near the date, and no attempt to disguise it. He wrote that he would not ask to be believed because he was a duke. He would spend as long as necessary becoming a man whose word she knew how to measure. Seraphina kept that letter in the drawer beside her bed. More followed. Some were grave, concerning Mr. Pember, Dr. March, and the circulation of retractions. Some were dryly foolish, arguing that lemon ice was not extravagance, but evidence of civilization. Some contained no request at all, only the account of an orange tree at Larkmere that had survived neglect and was, therefore, in Griffin's opinion, morally superior to several members of the peerage. He called, properly. He walked with Seraphina in Lady Maribel's garden, never beyond sight of a chaperone, and somehow made propriety feel less like a cage than a frame through which trust could be observed growing. On a late summer afternoon, he received her in the Larkmere orangery, with Lady Maribel seated just beyond the open doors, pretending to read. The repaired bracelet lay on a small table between the orange trees. Mr. Vale had restored the cracked enamel, returned the decorative panel to its hidden place beneath the clasp, and mended the broken frame, but he had left a fine pale seam across the lilies and hawks, because Seraphina had asked him not to conceal the truth completely. Griffin stood opposite her, unusually still. "I have tried," he said, "not to mistake patience for virtue merely because I desired the reward of it." Seraphina touched the edge of the table. "That is a very careful beginning. I have practiced caution until it became almost unbearable. Poor your grace." His smile flickered, then faded into something more vulnerable. "Seraphina, I would like to ask you to marry me, not as reparation, not as a shelter raised over scandal, not because Harrowdene proved foolish enough to lose you, and I proved fortunate enough to be standing nearby." He drew a breath. "Because I love you, because I trust your judgment, even when it wounds my pride. Because I want a life in which your name is never discussed as property. Your silence is never mistaken for agreement, and partnership is not something I say prettily before witnesses, but something I practice when no one applauds." The orange leaves stirred faintly above them. Seraphina looked at the bracelet, then at the man who had learned to ask before touching even truth. "If I marry you, I will not become an ornament of Larkmere. No, you will become its conscience, and I shall attempt to deserve the inconvenience. I will see every paper that concerns my name. Before any other man calls it useful, I will keep my opinions. I have arranged my future happiness around that expectation." Her smile came slowly. It was not the smile she had been trained to wear. It belonged to her face because she allowed it there. "Then yes, Griffin, I will marry you." He did not seize her in joy. He bowed over her gloved hand and kissed it with such restrained feeling that Lady Maribel coughed from the terrace, in a manner no physician would have believed. 6 weeks later, Seraphina walked down the aisle of a small parish church near Larkmere Park, not in the bridal white that had once made her a sacrifice, but in ivory silk chosen without committee. Lady Maribel wept openly. Bess stood near the back with Mrs. Hobb. Mabel sent an orange blossom pressed between 2 sheets of paper. Lord Walcote attended because absence would have confessed more than pride permitted. Lady Nerissa was not invited. Daphne remained in Bath. Caspar's name was not spoken. When Seraphina gave her vow, no hidden certificate waited in a gentleman's coat. No sister stood ready to replace her. No one called her unfit. The promise she made was not inherited from a cradle. It was spoken by a woman who understood the weight of yes, because she had learned the cost of no. Later, after the wedding breakfast had quieted and the household had retreated into happy usefulness, Seraphina stood with Griffin in the Larkmere morning room, before the table where the restored bracelet waited. Griffin lifted it, then paused. He did not need to ask aloud. The habit lived in the space he left. Seraphina took the bracelet from his hand. "I will fasten it myself." His eyes warmed. "I hoped you would." She closed it around her wrist. The clasp held. The seam remained visible. A fine line across enamel and gold, neither hidden nor ashamed. She turned to Griffin and took his hand first. "I love you," she said, because truth deserved repetition when no room required proof. His fingers closed around hers. "I love you, Seraphina." She stepped into his arms freely, and he held her as a man holds what he has not conquered and never intends to own. His forehead touched hers for one quiet breath. Beyond the window, late summer light rested on Larkmere's lawns. On her wrist, the old promise had become something new, Not a chain, not a correction, not a prize another family could transfer, but a chosen remembrance with the crack still visible and the gold still strong.